Somewhere beneath the deserts of Egypt, a team of researchers caught something on radar that should not exist. A pulse, a perfect outline, a hollow corridor buried hundreds of feet below the Sphinx. For a moment, the signal held steady, then vanished. The data was quietly archived, the scan repeated, and again the same void appeared stretching toward the plateau like a vein of darkness. They said it was a geological pocket, but the same signature appeared beneath Peru, and another half a world away, under the ice of Antarctica, long linear tunnels carved through solid rock, each matching the same impossible ratio. When you trace them on a map, they begin to form something that doesn't look random at all. They line up, across continents and under oceans as if they were all once connected, as if the planet itself still carries the blueprints of a civilization that learned to hide from the surface. Across the world's oldest stories, people once spoke of these same depths. The Egyptians called it the Duat, the hidden realm beneath the sand where souls journeyed between worlds. In Tibet and India, it was Agartha, a radiant kingdom of teachers who survived the last cataclysm by retreating into the earth. The Hopi told of the ant people who sheltered humankind from fire raining from the sky. Every culture remembered an underworld, not as metaphor but as refuge, and now machines are finding the same shapes their ancestors described. Archaeologists point to Derinkuyu in Turkey, a city buried 18 stories deep, with sealed doors, air shafts, wine presses, even a school. It could house 20,000 people. And it wasn't built in panic. It was planned. Stone by stone, torch by torch. They built a world beneath the world for reasons we still can't explain. And that's where the trail begins. From the honeycombed rock of Cappadocia to the acoustic temples of Malta, from South American labyrinths to the radar voids beneath Giza, clues surface of a global network that was never meant to be found. Each tunnel, each echoing chamber tells the same story, that at some point in the deep past humanity may have already faced its greatest threat and survived it by going underground. So the question isn't if there's a connection, it's why they built it, what they left behind, and whether we've been walking above the entrances our entire lives. But first, before we begin exploring these lost ancient underground complexes, if you find yourself genuinely pulled towards stories of mystery, conspiracy and forgotten lore, please consider subscribing. And if you truly like tonight's story, a gentle press on the like button or a friendly comment sure does go a long way to keep these journeys coming. Now let's dim the lights and settle in as we return to the desert, to a canvas tent beside the Sphinx, where a team of researchers has just turned on their radar. A green glow washes the tent's dim light as the radar screen warms in the desert heat. A clean rectangle brightens where limestone should be, then thins like breath on glass. The operator steadies a gloved hand on the console. The outline holds for 3 heartbeats, slides half a meter, and fades between layers. Outside, wind lifts grit against canvas and the metal frame ticks as it cools. Someone exhales. No one speaks. Then the shape returns. A second echo, same proportions, fixed beneath a forepaw that has watched this plateau longer than any library has kept a ledger. They jockey the antenna a few degrees. The rectangle elongates into a corridor, clipped on one end, open on the other. Depth markers rise, 6 meters, 9, 12. Thermal shimmer waves above the sand. Static fizzes through the headset, then a low, steady tone like a pulse you can't pin to a chest. When the technician dials the gain down, the tunnel tightens into focus, emptiness drawn with the clarity of a blueprint. A field notebook opens to a fresh page. A pencil rattles under the tip of a thumbnail, then starts to move. The team huddles around numbers that don't match the known foundation. The void sits directly beneath the Sphinx's paw, not off to the side, not some random fissure. It reads like something made to sit exactly there, key to a weight older than empires. 21st century gear sees it. The forms are clear enough to sketch and dull enough to be argued. A phone camera clicks, a lid snaps shut. The desert heat retreats as clouds drift over, and a message goes out for verification. What returns isn't debate, it is quiet. Emails route to other departments. 2 calls drop. A polite reply asks for patience while access is coordinated. Then nothing. The plateau has a history with nothing. Early last century, Émile Barrés crawled through choked passages near the monument and marked blocked shafts others passed by. His notes don't read like law. They read like a man trying to clear his throat in a dusty room and call attention to the walls. Later came a different kind of map. Trance-born claims of a hall of records sealed below the lion's heart. A library that many still chase and many more roll their eyes at. The story sharpened public hunger and soured academic patience in equal measure. In the 1990s, concrete hardened over exposed openings under official authority. Some say it was to protect fragile stone. Others say it was to protect fragile narratives. Hard edges poured, and the debate set like aggregate. Heavy, useful, and hard to move. On a nearby rise, another shaft drops into a ladder of chambers that smell of mineral and time. They call it the Osiris shaft. Descent begins as rock steps, narrow enough that a boot heel must edge along in half turns. Then water takes the floor and the walls lean in. Headlamps cut cones through brown-green depths. A rope slips through cold fingers and a brass buckle taps the ladder rung. Divers lower into a room where granite coffers rest under ripples, lids askew, contents empty. No inscriptions to flatter kings, no bodies to solemnize a lineage. Just geometry and craft, as if the builders trusted the stone to say what needed saying. Down another level, the precision tightens. Corners meet like drafted lines, not drilled guesses. Walkways meet chambers that feel tuned by hand rather than hacked by hand. You step by step, counting breaths to keep nerves from climbing. The air tastes metallic. It could be trace minerals. It could be imagination. Either way, the sensation points upward toward a civil daylight, while you crouch in a hole that reads like a proof. Farther south at Saqqara, the Serapeum holds hallways wide enough for 2 carts to pass, should carts have ever been asked to move this kind of weight. Each chamber offers a granite box the size of a small room, lids taller than a child, corners straight like a jeweler's square, faces polished to a shine that catches a lamp and throws it back at your pupils. Some of these boxes weigh near 100 tons. You can run a fingertip along the inside wall and feel no catch. Archaeologists note the craftsmanship and argue the means. Engineers measure tolerances in fractions less than a millimetre and raise eyebrows. Supporters suggest a set of tools we do not yet fully understand. Critics counter with patient labour and skill refined by centuries of practice. The room does not change its story either way. In 1993, a study rolled seismographic gear over the same ground and reported cavities where no agenda required them. The paper drew breaths, then drew back. Retraction arrived without a public reason. Some whisper the data was flawed and needed correction. Others whisper it wasn't the data that needed correction. Those contradicting whispers never meet. They pass each other in the same hallway and keep walking. Pull the radar signatures beyond Egypt and the rectangles return in ribs and echoes. Surveys in the Andes show linear hollows that snag the eye because they use right angles the way rock rarely does. Under ice, signals slide out as cylinders that hold form where pressure should crush them flat. The readings persist across passes. Map them in soft pencil and a pattern pricks up through paper, alignments that look like choices. An older map complicates the picture. The Buache Chart from the 18th century sketched Antarctica without its ice and drew river courses in the white space. Centuries later, satellite studies described similar channels far under the sheet, not identical lines, but the categories match. Some whisper of preserved surveying from a time when the climate was different or when knowledge travelled differently. Others dismiss it as clever inference, a cartographer guessing at symmetry. The paper itself crackles under gloved fingers, refusing to settle the argument. The more you lay these fragments beside each other, the more the edges begin to lock. These voids do not sit like pockets blown by trapped gas, at least not all of them. They string into corridors, align with features that matter to a planet more than they matter to a township, and repeat dimensions like an instruction manual handed between cultures that never wrote each other letters. The radar sees rectangles, the ice returns cylinders, the bedrock offers right angles where lava tubes would curl. The pattern tilts in the light, and its meaning sharpens. Back at the Sphinx, there is history of hands closing doors. There is also the record of people opening them carefully, Emile with his notes, teams with seismographs and patience, divers who see only as far as their lamps allow. A worker shakes sand out of a boot and stares at the horizon, where structures rise like the spines of sleeping animals. A wheelbarrow squeaks, a clipboard flips. A conversation starts and ends with a look toward a fence line. The human scale rolls on, even as the grand questions pile up like dune slip faces. What purpose calls for a chamber under a paw? If it is ritual, the craft speaks in a language precise enough to be measured centuries later. If it is storage, the emptiness argues a curation we do not understand. If it is purely symbolic, these symbols were carved as if the rock itself mattered as much as meaning. Supporters suggest these are not isolated wonders, but parts of a system designed to interact with the ground, the air, and perhaps the people inside. Critics counter coincidence, selection bias, the human brain playing connect the dots across millennia. Between those poles lies a long hallway with more doors than keys. The Osiris shaft returns in memory with its cold water and quiet granite. Any voice here turns small and careful. People keep their hands low and their lamps up. The rope burns a palm. A diver taps a lid, and the sound travels slow, like a drum heard from the far end of a warehouse. You climb out with a stripe of wet on your sleeve and the sense that you have passed through a place that is waiting. For what? It does not say. Satara's granite boxes wait as well. They are easy to dramatize and easier to argue about. Easier still to stand in front of one with a small flashlight and a skin prickle and try to put your finger on why a human would spend this much effort on exactness. A little filament bulb gives out a tired glow. Dust hangs. The mind flips through functions, burial, storage, ceremony, power, and keeps coming back to the accuracy like a tune you can't get out of your head. The sealed shafts of the 1990s feed that tune with a backbeat. The poured caps look modern and blunt against ancient cut stone. You can call it conservation. You can call it control. The action itself sits on the surface, obvious as a bandage, and invites you to wonder how deep the wound goes. Not all closures are sinister. Not every lock hides a treasure. But locks change the way a door looks, and the mind supplies reasons when none are offered. Meanwhile, instruments do what they do. They give you numbers and shapes. The rectangular echo under the paw returns across runs. Slight shifts, tiny contractions, but a repeated geometry. That matters. Engineers know that random rock rarely repeats itself so politely. Geologists know that stone can surprise those same engineers. The tension between those truths is where this story breathes. Outside Egypt's dust, the wider world answers with its own voids. Under the Andes, long lines light up where one expects ruptures that snake, not march. Beneath Antarctic ice, radar draws forms that seem to ignore the weight drifting above them. These are not smoking guns. They are suggestive silhouettes. Lay the silhouettes on a globe and you could argue for a network. You could also argue for enthusiasm meeting its own reflection. The responsible mind holds both. The Buache Chart sits on a table as a quiet provocation. Someone traced those southern rivers centuries before satellites. The details don't match perfectly. They don't need to. The idea does the work. That knowledge can arrive out of its time and ask you to adjust your confidence. Some will smile and say it's a lucky guess. Some will lower their voices and propose a line of memory that history forgot to transcribe. In a late hour and a low voice, either possibility keeps you awake. So we hover over Giza's bedrock again, watching a rectangular echo blink like a distant window in a storm. It is easy to lean into the romance of hidden rooms and ancient plans. It is also fair to lean back and say, show me more. Both poses have dignity when handled with care. The path ahead favours neither faith nor dismissal. It favours boots, notebooks, and the patience to live inside a question. Workers zip tents as the sun drops behind hard lines of stone. The generator coughs and settles. A technician peels off headphones and rubs the groove they left. Dust hangs, then falls. The Sphinx returns to its long habit of saying nothing out loud. Wind combs the plateau and leaves only small signatures the day will cover tomorrow. Night brings relief, and with it, a plan to follow the line where it leads. Not all doors open to fanfare. Some open to a kitchen wall giving way to cold air and a candle that gutters in a sudden draught. Our next doorway did exactly that, half a continent away, and what waited beyond it did not fit inside a single house or a single lifetime. He thought he'd find an extra storage nook. A Turkish man in 1963, a hammer in his hand, plaster dust on his forearms, prying at a stubborn wall in his basement. The stone gave with a dull crack and a breath of cold air rolled out that didn't belong to a summer afternoon. His candle bent sideways in the draught. The flame guttered, then steadied, and he pressed a palm to the edge of the new opening, feeling rough rock and the faint pull of air from a deeper dark. Steps waited inside, chiselled into tuff, the volcanic stone of Cappadocia. He took them anyway, testing each tread with the heel of his shoe. The house above faded to a thin vibration, his breath and the soft scrape of leather on stone swallowed by a space that seemed to widen with each step. The stairs unfurled into a corridor where the walls narrowed and then opened to a small chamber that smelled like dry earth and old grain. He touched a groove in the wall and found the path continued, guiding him toward a vertical shaft where cool air whistled softly. The candle's flame leaned toward the draught, pointing down. Above him, the shaft rose beyond sight, a clean cylinder cut as if drawn by a compass and chiselled by steady hands through layers of rock for a purpose he could feel in his chest. He stood at the lip and listened. Somewhere lower, air moved with a steady pulse that matched nothing on the surface. What began as a home repair revealed a city stepped into the ground. Derinkuyu descends roughly 18 levels, about 85 metres, a stack of galleries and rooms that read like a manual for living below. The ventilation system runs like a lattice, tall shafts touching every level so fresh air sweeps even the deepest chambers. The sound of it is subtle and constant, a soft rush that tells you the system still works. Along the main axes, circular stones sit in grooves, rolling doors that can be tilted into place from the inside to seal a corridor with a single shove. In the ribs of the city you find cellars, stables, a press for wine, long refectories where meals were taken together, and chapel niches where smoke-dark ceilings reveal years of devotion. Stand long enough in one of the larger halls and the layout starts to resolve into intent. Each level can be isolated. Stairways narrow to control movement. Rooms cluster around the shafts that bring not only air but sound. Call from one opening and you hear the reply spiral down, delayed and softened. Some whisper this was communication by design, air and voice braided through stone so signals moved without messengers. Others dismiss that as romantic, and yet the geometry leaves a mark on your senses anyway. You feel planned space under your fingertips. On paper, Derinkuyu could shelter around 20,000 people with animals and stores. The number is heavy in the mind, but the details make it feel practical. Shallow troughs near stable doors, a place where a grindstone likely sat, soot traces in kitchens set closer to the surface for safe venting. In the deep levels, water came from shafts that doubled as wells, their mouths guarded by stone collars. One circular door is cut with a neat round hole 6 or 7 centimetres across, just enough to push a spear through while keeping the door's weight anchored. A single person could hold that threshold for as long as the arms allowed. Here is where the paradox arrives. On the plateau above, Surface settlements from those early centuries read as simple life. Modest houses, basic workshops, field walls. Nothing there announces the capability to draft and excavate a honeycomb of this scale. Yet below, the city shows sequencing, load distribution, a working knowledge of airflow, and a knack for controlling moisture that modern engineers still nod at. The rock is soft enough to carve with metal tools, but the volume removed is staggering, and the maintenance of a stable microclimate over so many levels suggests repeated use and careful adjustment. The surprise doesn't stop at one town. Travel a short distance through Cappadocia, and you meet Kaymakla, Özkonak, and dozens more. Each has its character, yet angles echo. Door diameters repeat. Passages keep to familiar heights and widths, as if the same guidelines were carried by different crews over the years. Özkonak shows passages drilled with small communication holes between levels, deliberate and consistent, while Kaymakla spreads like a low, wide hive. The alignments across sites suggest either a shared blueprint or the diffusion of a standard, that idea moving faster and more reliably than we expect for the time. Look from above and the picture changes again. Modern aerial surveys have flagged circular depressions and sinkholes across the plateau. They appear in loose grids, not random scatter. Some seem to sit in lines pointing toward known entrances. Others suggest satellite nodes with collapsed caps. Supporters suggest these marks are not simply the quirks of soft stone but signals of a network. Critics counter that geology alone can arrange patterns where none were intended. The map keeps its secrets, but even a skeptical eye notes how often these pocks sit within walking distance of already excavated cities, like surface punctuation above buried sentences. In local stories, the earth remembers trouble. Tales speak of the sky turning a dim colour and ash that drifted for days. Bands from the east or the west, pick your era, poured across the plains, and those who knew slipped below until the hoofbeat faded. The chapels underground hint at long pauses. Liturgies carried on where they were safest. These spaces serve defence, yes, but the scale reads as more than a hurried barricade. Some whisper the original purpose tied to climate stress, a period when the wind's bite turned cruel and crops failed. Underground maintains a steady temperature. The walls hold water well. A city like this becomes a life support system more than a bolt hole. Daily life underground wouldn't have felt like a myth. Families slept in upper chambers to reach daylight quickly when it was safe. Livestock lived on lower levels, the smell of animals riding the draft towards shafts where it lifted away. Food was pressed and stored in rooms where the air stayed cool and still. During festivals, or fear, they gathered in a central hall. Songs rose into the shafts. The rock returned a warm harmony that made the words easier to hear across levels. The design acts like organ pipes. One tone snaps sharply into focus and carries, another is swallowed. Whether that was intentional or learned over time doesn't need a verdict. You can hear the effect by standing at the right angle and humming. The tool marks present a quieter mystery. In some corridors the walls are neat and plainer, steady work by many hands over many seasons. In others the marks show different rhythms, strokes that imply a new group took over. Archaeological layers where they survive place initial excavations centuries before later used by communities we know more about. That timing creates a gap. The culture that carved the first levels does not match the administrative complexity the space implies. Others dismiss the gap as an illusion created by disturbed strata and uneven sampling. Still, the mismatch between sophistication below and simplicity above keeps prodding at the record. Engineers who model airflow note something else. The shafts and cross passages create turnover rates that could support more than the known capacity. In some configurations, the system moves enough air for a population far beyond 20,000. The math is dry, but its edge is sharp. Overbuilding hints at contingency. Were they planning for waves of guests fleeing a season of raids? Or did the design anticipate a different scale of occupation, perhaps for linked cities drawing on the same lungs of stone? The pattern echoes choices at other ancient sites where parts seem scaled to loads. that never arrive in the official story. One afternoon in a newer neighbourhood, a contractor driving rebar into the soil felt the bar plunge deeper than expected. When they cleared the hole, a pocket opened and the same cool draft brushed the skin. The city had been there all along, under foundations and garden walls. Officials sealed the opening, sight in safety, but the street carried a rumour for months. People claimed to hear a thin whine under the curb at night when the wind shifted. It might have been a trick of wind or a truck's brakes far off. Or it might have been air switching direction in passages the map has not met yet. Derinkuyu links to Geomagnetic by a tunnel of several kilometres if reports hold. If that corridor exists end to end, it changes how you read the whole. Not a single refuge, but a chain. The number of smaller towns, 200 perhaps more, suggest a lattice under the plateau. Some lines dead end. Others pass under modern roads and vanish where foundations cut them. Satellite moisture readings, taken after heavy rains, sometimes show damp bands where no drainage should be. Lines in the soil you can't quite explain with surface contours alone. Supporters suggest those bands trace collapsed or silted corridors. Others call them the footprint of ephemeral streams. The evidence resists easy sorting, but it nudges consistently towards scale. People debate the origin again and again. One popular view credits early Iron Age craftsmen for the first layers, then centuries of adaptation. It fits with the tools we've found. Yet when you stand inside, especially near the long verticals, another possibility flickers. Perhaps the technique to carve into this tuff, its habits, its break lines, how it holds when damp, was knowledge passed along like a song. You can hand such knowledge down without writing it, and it survives war, language shifts and drought. That would explain consistency without requiring a single empire's command. A local baker remembers his grandfather telling how elders let a chicken down near an old shaft with a rope tied loosely around its middle. If the bird fussed and its comb stayed red, the air below was good. If it panted, you closed the cover. Rough field science, yes. But it meshes with the respect people show these vents. Today, many are capped neatly or fenced. Even now, on a hot day, you can rest a hand over some and feel a thermal sigh that cools the skin. Take a slow breath at the lower levels and your ears ring slightly. Not loud, just a high tone that drifts when you turn your head. The geometry plays tricks on sound. Two people walking at different depths can hear each other better at a wedge in the stairs than when standing side by side in a hall. If you strike a small stone against a wall in one corner, someone across the chamber hears it as if it came from above. Some whisper this was training, teaching children how to listen and use the space to speak without shouting. Others say it's simply a property of curved rock. We like our categories neat. Fortress, monastery, market. Derinkuyu refuses that. It has grooves for grinding and niches for prayer. It has choke points for defence and beds cut into the walls. It has water that doesn't taste of iron because the shafts avoid the seams that leach it. Whoever planned this didn't aim for a seasoned shelter. They aimed for something that could be left for years, then reopen when needed, parts still functioning because the system was simple and robust. Modern mapping continues, but much remains unexcavated or sealed. Authorities point to safety, and they are right to. The stone can shift if you open the wrong seam. Still, the map looks sparse against the stories. When children play street soccer near an older district and the ball thumps a spot that answers with a hollow note, they laugh and call it the drum. Adults glance over, listen a second, and then steer the game toward a denser patch of ground. The habit says enough. A network like this invites wider questions. If one plateau embraced living underground for long stretches, what did they fear or expect? Raids can burn years of labour, so security is a strong answer. Faith can demand retreat, so ritual seclusion fits too. But the overbuild, the airflow that handles more breath than we have bodies for, keeps tugging. Some whisper that people came in waves from farther north and south when weather buckled into extremes. Derinkuyu as way station. Or perhaps a place to guard important knowledge through bad years, where a few held memory for the many. None of that needs to be proved tonight for the weight of the place to work on you. You can run a fingertip along a spiral carved on a threshold stone and feel the shallow grooves polish under skin. You can close your eyes and hear a pot clink lightly, a goat's hoof, a child's voice saying hush near a stair so as not to spook animals. You can smell a trace of the mineral damp that rises only from old stone. And then the over-design returns to mind. Oxygen models, cross-sectional area versus expected population, redundancy upon redundancy in shafts and stones that roll. These choices mirror a pattern at major sites across the world, where the build seems a size too large for the official story. Maybe caution drove it, maybe status did. Or maybe the builders timed their craft to cycles we've forgotten, and this was how you survive a swing when winters bite harder or ash clouds hang long. As you climb back toward the house where it began, your shoulder brushes a wall that flattens like it was asked to by a surveyor you'll never meet. Above, a kettle whistles faintly in a kitchen. Below, air moves past your ankles with the soft insistence of a system still doing its job. If this is one node among many under the plateau, how many others sit sealed under new homes, schools and courtyards, waiting behind a wall someone hasn't knocked down yet? The path forward seems to split. One route follows corridors tied to survival and storage. The other drifts towards spaces built to shape what people felt and heard. A different kind of engineering that doesn't store grain or count heads, but touches the mind. The next set of steps leads in that direction, where stone answers voice in ways that suggest these underground works carried more than bodies. They carried states of mind, and maybe messages meant to travel farther than the limits of a single city. 40 feet down, the air cools and the limestone takes over the sound. You place a palm on the carved wall and feel a faint texture like pressed sand. The chamber holds a steady hush until a single note threads the space. Then the rock answers, not loud, more like a low skin drum in the ribs. The hippodrome breathes back when the voice settles into its range, and you hear it fold through side rooms you cannot see. The effect lives in a small space locals call the oracle room. At exactly 110 hertz, a male voice sets the chamber ringing. The tone spills through niches and curves, and the next room finds the same note as if the wall shared a memory. Archaeologists did not expect this kind of accuracy from Stone Age hands, yet the sound does not smear. It locks. Even a soft hum passes from one cavity to another, blooming as it goes and fading in a slow afterring. That number is not just a number. In modern tests, 110 Hz nudges the brain into an altered rhythm. People report a float in time, a softening at the edge of vision. Some describe a gentle pressure around the eyes. The effect is measurable. It suggests the builders shaped the rock not only for ritual, but for a change in state. If true, this turns architecture into a tool for consciousness, long before anyone wrote manuals for the mind. The place itself is a machine of stone. 3 levels carved downward through bedrock, each with its own temperature and smell. The top level carries a faint dry dust. The middle cools and grows sweeter, like damp linen. The lowest holds a mineral bite you taste on the tongue. Walls curve like an ear canal, guiding pressure and tone. Small recesses sit where sound wants to bounce, breaking waves into complex patterns. In practice, this makes male voices carry and female voices dim, an acoustic bias built into the plan. There is an old report from the early 1900s. A survey party inside these rooms heard chanting far beyond the known cut. The sound was distant, a layered drone that seemed to recede as they moved toward it. Later, a few members went missing near a sealed corridor, their names noted and then folded into rumour. Others dismissed those stories as misremembered. Still, the map shows plugs and blind turns, and the stone in certain doorways feels newer under the fingers. A small clay figure rests in a case above ground now. They call her the Sleeping Lady. Curled on her side in a fetal pose, eyes closed, one arm tucked beneath the head as if listening. Found within the complex, she reads like a note left by the users of this place. Supporters suggest she marks a guided sleep, a planned descent into a dream state shaped by the room's voice. It could also simply mark rest and rebirth. Either way, the pose matches what the chambers seem to ask of a body. Lie down, breathe, and let the stone's low music do its work. These techniques echo far from Malta. Across the ocean at Chavin de Huanta in Peru, carved ducts send air and sound in loops, while priests used conch shells to pour a roar through stone. People walking those corridors reported disorientation, a planned confusion. North of there, in Mexico, Teotihuacan hid rooms lined with pools of mercury. Torchlight on liquid metal throws shifting light like water under a moon, a visual trick that works on balance and mood. Different materials, same aim, control the senses to open a door inside. Modern acousticians went back to the 110 Hz number and tried it in labs, electrodes and calm rooms, volunteers and careful notes. The results show entrainment, where the brainwave falls into step with the external tone. Some subjects saw faint shapes with eyes closed. Others felt a rising anxiety. One caution came up again and again. Resonance is powerful but not gentle by default. At the wrong amplitude, a frequency that calms can also rattle a structure or a nervous system. The builders in stone seem to have tuned for safety, but the edge is there. Not all the map is on the brochure. In 2012, a bedrock scan reported voids beyond the marked boundary of the hypogeum. The project did not move forward to open them. Access was denied, with no public reason offered. Critics counter that stability comes first in a fragile site. Some whisper of deeper rooms kept out of view. What stands is a simple fact. Instruments read spaces the public cannot enter, and the line between the known and the guessed runs right under the ticket gate. Return to the rock and how it works. A human voice filling a carved tube sets up pressure zones, where a niche interrupts the wave, carrying modes bloom or die. Here, the builders placed alcoves where those modes amplify male vocal ranges. The spaces that dampen higher notes sit like soft baffles. On the lowest level, a barrel ceiling turns a whisper into a low carry that travels down stairwells like a thread. You can walk a level away and still feel the tone touch your sternum. Think of a simple scene to bring it close. A guide stands in the oracle room and taps the wall with a knuckle. The first tap is a dull thud. The second lands at the right pitch and the room answers with a longer body. He steps aside and asks you to hum. The note swells, then you stop. The room does not stop right away. It holds the tone a breath longer and sends it around a corner. You cannot see the corner, you can hear it. What were these performances for? The clay figure hints at sleep. The layout suggests process. Down through levels, inward through sound, out again under daylight with a different heartbeat. The match between acoustic design and human response makes a plain argument for intent. But the content of that intent stays in shadow. Were people trained here, healed, initiated, or was this a place where stories were told through vibration rather than words? Global echoes make the questions ring harder. The Andes carried sound through stone-like cables. The Valley of Mexico bent light inside sealed rooms to stretch vision. Each site is different, yet the method repeats. Control the inputs the brain trusts most. Hearing, sight, breath, and a doorway opens. If these places arose apart, the convergence points to an ancient curiosity about how the body reacts to tuned spaces. If they share a lineage, the map tightens into a network with nodes trading techniques across seas. The hypogeum's age places it far back, but the craft reads like later science. That mismatch is where the intrigue lives, not because it proves a lost high-tech culture, but because it shows how much precision humans can find with patient hands and feedback from the material. Limestone tells you when it agrees, the tool sings, the wall carries, a new niche makes the next note bloom. The builder listens and carves again. Past the tor, beyond the rope, the stone still holds the last voice it heard as a kind of memory in dust and scratch. Down one sealed stair, early reports spoke of a cold draft moving toward a closed slab. Airflow hints at open space beyond the plug. It might be a small pocket. It might be a corridor. The only way to know is to open it, and that is where caretaking meets curiosity in a standstill. For now, the site offers what it always has. A tone that changes how a body feels inside its own head. You step back into daylight, and the birds seem sharper, the world a little farther away. The note hangs for a while, then fades. The mind keeps listening after the sound is gone. If these rooms were one-off experiments, then the mystery is local and old. If they were nodes in a set of tuned sites, then the idea stretches across water and centuries, a message sent not by words, but by stone that knows how to sing. The next corridor might answer, if anyone is allowed to follow where the hum leads. The air changes as soon as you leave Malta's low-tuned chambers behind. Down there, the walls felt like instruments waiting for a voice. Here, in the Ecuadorian jungle, the stone gives back nothing. No hum, no warmth, just a cold metallic stillness that swallows the scrape of a boot and turns a beam of light into a hard line across rock that shines like obsidian. Your breath fogs the headlamp lens. When you wipe it clear, the tunnel looks like a corridor made for machines, not roots and rain. You follow the rope down a tight throat of stone and step into a hall that shouldn't be here. The ceiling is flat and level. The corners are clean 90-degree turns that meet like machined edges. A caver runs his glove along the wall and pulls back a palm streaked with dust, but the surface glints underneath, smooth as glass. Volcanic rock is supposed to break jagged, with bubbles and scars. This looks pressed and finished. He leans close and sees his own eye peering back at him, warped by a faint curve in the stone. He laughs once, a quick nervous sound, then it dies in the air. Some whisper that this place was cut with tools the region didn't have. No bronze saws, no steel chisels, and certainly no diamond blades. Archaeology keeps it careful. Caves can surprise you, and water can carve what looks deliberate. Still, when a tunnel turns and the right angle stays true, the mind keeps circling the same question. If not natural, then how? A second lamp clicks on, and the beam shoots down a straight passage that runs longer than the rope's reach. The floor feels too even for collapsed rock. Your heel finds no loose rubble. The caver up front pauses and presses his ear to the wall, as if he expects a tremor. Only his own breath comes back. Local stories pulled a different kind of attention above ground. A priest with a knack for collecting oddities displayed metal plates covered in unknown symbols. They were said to have come from these depths, carried up by villagers trading memory for food and medicine. The plates flickered through small rooms, moved to back closets, then slid into the hands of private buyers. Supporters suggest they were part of a cache, a record written in metal where paper would rot. Critics counter that scavengers reproduce what sells, and a good story paints a shiny patina over anything. Either way, the pieces that could speak with certainty have gone quiet. Then a surprise echo developed a year with cameras and clipboards. A man who had walked on the moon climbed down toward the glossy walls. The official line said geology. Field notes mentioned surveying. It's fair to assume that was part of it. Yet images from the trip show faces turned toward corners too sharp for leva, and hands brushing surfaces with the kind of care you reserve for a machine. The moonwalker's smile in that light is small and steady, like someone reading an instrument they don't quite want to name. The team mapped chambers and took measurements. They drafted cross-sections that looked suspiciously like corridors. The public report was tidy. It did not lean into myth. It also didn't settle the unease that spreads when mirrored stone meets a story about buried records and long travel underground. You leave with questions and take them south, where the ground rises toward old capitals and the earth keeps secrets behind staircases. Cusco's plazas sit above a different kind of underworld. The tunnels here aren't polished mirrors. They're tight and winding, carved through bedrock and mortared joints. Spanish accounts tell of corridors that ran under the city, branching in long lines that swallowed soldiers. They stepped in with torches and did not step out. People still talk about warm stone and the odd pull of air that spins a flame without a draft. The hardest part is not mystery, but the way streets and homes now rest on top. You can feel a grid of passages under your feet and can't follow them without pulling up a city. Some shafts open, then choke off 10 metres in. Others end with a slam of worked stone. When the blocks meet, the seam looks deliberate, as if a door slid shut and never moved again. A mason runs his finger along an old joint and nods without speaking. Whatever locked this did so 500 years ago or far earlier, and it wasn't chance. You see children playing on the square and think of narrow tunnels, running like ribs below the stones. The old word people use for these passages is not a word for caves, it's closer to arteries, channels, places where the earth breathes. Drive east and the lake opens, blue and cold at height. On its bank stands a piece of rock carved as if the mountain was meant to have a door but changed its mind halfway through. The form suggests a frame, with a smaller inset that almost fits a person standing. The face of the stone feels worn but not random. A caretaker rests a hand on the groove and tells a quiet tale. A priest with a round gold disc walked here in danger and pressed it to the stone. He shone like a lantern, and he stepped forward. The light swallowed him, and he was gone. The tale doesn't claim proof. It doesn't need it. It lives at the edge of memory, where ritual meets a rock that looks like a closed gate. Night cold comes early at altitude. You see your breath move across the stone and blur it for a second. A human layer over a very old cut. You pull back and the door looks plain again. Nearby, gullies carry meltwater and the calls of birds. Quiet crowds in. A truck passes on a dirt road and the sound fades into the hills faster than it should. The air here has edges. Back west, the range holds heat even after the sun drops. Sensors lowered from small planes and carried by teams on foot read the skin of the ground for temperature and magnetism. On screen, the mountain should glow with random patches, bleeding colours where rocks hold warmth or cold. Instead, straight lines appear under a ridge, consistent and parallel for kilometres. They hold a steady width. They don't branch like lava tubes and don't spiral like faults. The data looks like someone ran a knife under the crust and didn't waver. You overlay the lines on old maps. A few match known caves. Others cross through places where no entry has ever been recorded. The easy answer is equipment drift or software artifacts. That happens. Then a second pass with a different rig shows the same corridors, and a third, months later, still keeps the line straight. If they are natural, they are unusual. If they are built, the hand that cut them had a very steady rule. The pattern in the Andes taps the same nerve as the chambers far out at sea on an island of honeyed stone. In one place, walls shape a voice and make a body feel different. In another, a corridor acts like a mirror and refuses warmth. Ocean apart, both pull you into a design that knows the body through sound or through touch. In Cusco, they call the tunnel something like veins of the gods. That phrase carries a sense of duty. Veins feed and cleanse. They move. They link organs and keep a system in balance. When you walk along those old plazas, you strike your palm against fitted blocks that sit flush centuries later and wonder if the channels below once guided more than footsteps. Songs, maybe. Air under pressure. Stories carried from one end of a realm to another without a scribe. Some whisper that plate collections once showed a script meant for metal and dark places, written to be read with hands as much as eyes. If a network ran from jungle to mountain to lake, any records made for it would stay safe from flood and fire. The ground itself would be the vault. It's tempting to fold everything into one neat theory. Doors that open with discs, moonwalkers who went looking, plates that shine, straight lines under a mountain. A calmer path keeps categories clear. We have reports of military-era expeditions and public trips that called their work geology. We have colonial notes about lost soldiers below a city, and local tales about a door in the rock. We have thermal traces that look engineered and hands-on walls that feel wrong for their geology. Together they don't prove a single system, they do nudge the mind toward connections. At a base camp near the jungle cave, a cook pours coffee into tin cups and sets one aside for the last pair still below. He points out how his breath hangs in the air at dawn, and jokes that the mountain smokes when it's thinking. Humour helps when a team sleeps near a hole in the ground that feels like a mouth. High above, in a mountain town, a shopkeeper locks up and steps around a set of stones that never settled after an old quake. Warm air seeps from the crack in winter. He doesn't mention it to tourists. The thing about polished rock is that it shows you what you bring to it. A skeptic sees the sly work of water in 1,000 seasonal floods. A believer sees a blueprint under the forest floor. Most of us see our own faces looking back from a wall and wince at the helmet light. Either way, the shapes keep their angles, doors keep their outlines, corridors keep their widths. The longer you stand there, the harder it is to call it all random. South again. A guide in a reed boat taps his oar against the carved face near the lake and smiles. Old, he says, and taps again. You hear a dull, even note. He shrugs, as if to say that old things hum at their own pitch. When the wind shifts, the sound rolls into a gully and disappears. The world up here is all edges and thresholds. Thin air, bright sun, cold shadows and stone that looks like a plan. The flights that carried sensors plan their next passes. A grant moves through a committee. A camera charge runs low in a dark hall, and the reflection of a human eye fades off the wall. Somewhere a drawer closes on a few metal plates with odd lines. Somewhere else a story gets shorter with each retelling, until only the ending survives. He walked toward the stone and did not come back. If those straight warm lines below the ridges are pathways, they could tie the highlands to the jungle corridors and to the lake's inert door. If they are illusions, they show how eager a map is to connect its pins. Either way, the map on the table draws itself into a body. You can't help seeing arms, a torso, a throat. The mountains glow at lines that look like channels. The polished halls gleam like organs. The doorway waits like a closed valve. So the question turns softer and stranger. If the tunnels form arteries, then what did they once feed? If a continent holds a vascular memory, what heart did it serve? The next scan window opens next month when the air is dry and the instruments run truer. Until then, the jungle keeps its glass corridors, the city keeps its warm seams, and the lake keeps its carved frame, as if a pulse paused and is waiting for a hand to start it again. Austria, 1915. A frost still clings to the furrows when a farmer's plough strikes something that doesn't give like soil. The jolt travels up the handle into his palms, sharp and metallic in the bones. He steadies, clears his throat, and listens. A round, hollow ring answers from below, light as a bell but wrong somehow, too clean for buried rock. He kneels, breaks the crust with his knuckles and scrapes away wet earth. The smell is old and mineral-rich. Under his fingertips, a smooth cap of stone appears, out of place in a field that should hold nothing but roots and worms. He levers a corner, slips a hand into a seam, and cold air breathes across his skin like a draft from a locked cellar no one remembers building. He lowers a lantern through the opening. The light falls and stops on edges that shouldn't be this crisp underground. A narrow passage runs east, barely wide enough to squeeze a pair of shoulders, and all of it looks carved, not broken. He drops down and feels the rock press at his ribs. The walls curve without a single chisel divot. No burned soot kisses the ceiling. No ash nestles in corners. He shuffles forward, and the passage turns again, smooth as if wind shaped it. But it's too exact for wind. Then it stops. A stone plug blocks the way, fitted tight. It doesn't crumble under his knuckles. It feels placed, as if someone sealed the end on purpose, then left no mark to explain why. Word spreads because it always does. Other farmers confess that their fields ring the same way. Priests recall confessions about holes that whisper on winter nights. Map makers gather pins. They find more tunnels just like this one in Germany, then in Bohemia, then creeping west into France, and even whispers of cramped passages beneath Scotland's hills. People start calling them Erdställe, Earth Stables, a name that sounds practical until you crawl into one and feel how little they care for human comfort. The dimensions repeat with eerie regularity. Squeeze points where your chest scrapes rock, shoulder pinchers called schlupf, and niches so small a child would have to tuck their elbows in. They consistently face particular directions, often lining up with the compass in a way a ploughman would never need. This is where the tale tilts. If these were shelters, they were poorly suited to living. If they were storage, they were designed to keep people out rather than welcome them in. And yet they persist across the map. Hundreds upon hundreds, some counted, others rumoured, all sharing a careful sameness that suggests a plan someone lost the key to. When you stack that pattern across a continent, it begins to look less like chance and more like doctrine, a rulebook for digging that outlived its authors by centuries. At night, the older workers talk about Erdvikter, the little people of the earth. The phrase comes with a shrug, but the story lingers. Some say you could hear faint voices at small breathing holes, soft, almost conversational, when cows settled and frost thickened on fences. Across the water, Irish tales speak of the Tuatha De Danann retreating below ground when humans arrived, not defeated but withdrawn. Two very different cultures, two compatible memories. Something important went underfoot. Others dismiss such stories as bedtime tales. Yet the names endure because the objects they tether to have not gone away. When modern teams crawl in with knee pads and steady lamps, they expect to find the everyday waste of use. It isn't there. No cooking soot smudges the roofs. No fat drips into floor dust. No trash. No ordinary debris. No signs of smoke or fire. The rock reads clean. Carbon dating taken from sediments near some entrances places the construction centuries earlier than the cultures historians would expect to build across such a spread. Critics counter that dating sediments is not the same as dating stone, and they are right. Still, the mismatch nags at the mind. If not those cultures, then who? And if those cultures, then why so early? Another puzzle lives in a cheap compass. Hold it above ground and the needle settles true. Bring it down into certain Erdställe and it wavers. Sometimes it drifts, sometimes it twitches. Some whisper, this is mineral alignment, the rock itself carrying magnetic character. Others suggest design, that these passages might follow paths where Earth's electric and magnetic fields run stronger, like narrow streams of force hidden inside bedrock. It's speculation, cautious and unproven, but it gains weight when the tunnels bend to cardinal axes, even when the landscape above would make a straighter path easier. A century slides by. In Bavaria, a road crew lays pipe. A backhoe bucket snaps through a thin stone ceiling and drops clods into an open space. Dust rises, sharp with lime. A man pulls his scarf over his face and looks down. The hole is no bigger than a manhole cover. He lowers a small drone with a camera because no one wants to crawl first anymore. The drone glides along a narrow curve. The feed shows the same smooth runnel, the same shoulder pinch, the same absence of marks. It maps 1/2 kilometre of passage, arcing beneath a cluster of houses that predate modern zoning by a century. Then authorities step in, forms are filed, the hole is sealed with concrete for safety because collapse takes people, and lawsuits do not sleep. There is a logic to it. There is also a cost, counted in years before anyone can study what lies beyond the plug. In a quiet lab, an acoustician taps the wall of an exposed Erdstall with the heel of his hand and listens. He brings a small speaker, feeds a low tone into the stone, and records what comes back. The reverberation peaks near 110 Hz. It's a number that appears elsewhere in older chambers, famously in the Mediterranean, where a voice at that frequency can set walls to humming. Here, In these narrow tubes, the frequency doesn't bloom like a hall. It thickens in the chest instead, a pressure you feel more than hear. Supporters suggest the builders knew something about sound and its effects on the body that we only quantify now. Others dismiss it as coincidence, or the natural byproduct of tight spaces and dense rock. The data sits between them, stubborn and unhurried. Crawling through one of these passages is a study in limits. A graduate student wets her palms to get better grip and moves an inch at a time. Her helmet's plastic scrapes rock with a high, dry squeal. Dirt packs under her knees. Breaths shorten, not from lack of oxygen, but from the mind's response to a space that leaves no room for error. Her headlamp sweeps past a curve that looks like it was drawn with a compass. No gouges, no tears, only the smoothness of intent. The air is cool. The smell is clean stone cut a long time ago. She reaches a squeeze point and stops. It will take a sidelong wriggle to pass. Before she tries, she rests her palm on the wall. The rock is cold to the touch, indifferent to anyone's theories. The catalogue grows. Over 1,200 Erdställe are documented across Central Europe, some short like a swallowed breath, others running longer than comfort, most with a plug at the far end that you could almost believe has a matching plug behind it, as if two teams started from opposite sides and shook hands in the dark before closing their doors. The precision jars against the accepted manufacturing base of the time suggested by nearby finds. Predating known metalworking cultures in those regions, at least in the form that could polish smooth curves through bedrock, the tunnels ask for an explanation that does not reduce them to cellars or foxholes. If they were for hiding, the hides were brief. If they were for ritual, the rituals must have required an intimacy with stone most of us have never felt. Not every site fits the neat pattern. Some are collapsed, some have side nooks that might have held lamps, though if they did, the lack of soot still needs answering. A few show faint wear more pronounced than others, hinting at heavier use. That variation complicates easy stories. It also invites the possibility that a common template was adapted locally, like a recipe baked in different ovens but still recognisable after a bite. The orientation remains one of the clearest threads. Sections often align with the four directions, as if a compass sat in the dirt beside the builder's hand. When people talk about these tunnels around kitchen tables, the tone shifts between wonder and worry. Parents warn children not to explore holes. Old men say the ground talks and should be left to its conversations. Engineers nod at the safety concerns and pass on the cost estimates it would take to shore up fragile cavities so that study could proceed without risk. None of this changes the feeling that a map is trying to form, a faint set of lines the present keeps paving over with new roads and cellars. A small field test with magnetometers along a ridge reveals a thread of odd readings that runs parallel to a known Erdstall and extends beyond its current endpoints. The instruments hiccup, wobble, and then lock back in. Nothing dramatic, but enough to provoke a pencil note in the margin and a quiet call to a colleague who knows how to read the Earth's faintest signals. The colleague comes, listens to the machines and shrugs. Mineral bands can do this. Fault lines can do this. Designed paths could also do this, though there is no straightforward way to prove intent when the maker is centuries gone and the material is mute rock. Night returns. The farmer's field in Austria now grows a neat row of trees above where the first cap was found. Children climb them. The farmer's grandson sometimes pauses at the edge of the grove and glances down as if the ground might speak. It doesn't. The peace is honest. But under that peace, the narrow passage still runs east until it meets the stone plug that no one has yet chosen to breach. Maybe it is wiser left shut. Maybe the story grows in the space where no answer is handed down. From a higher view, the scattered dots of entrances gather themselves into strands that lace across valleys and under low hills. They look, from that height, like veins or wiring or notes on a sheet of music waiting for the right instrument. Many of those lines angle toward the southeast, toward older seas and older crossroads, as if drawn by a hand that favoured both geometry and something subtler. A field, a flow, a drift of natural force our tools can register but not fully explain. Far beyond the coast, another map lies under ice, and some say those lines will keep pointing until they meet it. The pull of that possibility is quiet and steady, like a compass needle that refuses to rest. The wind changes first. European soil and cramped stone give way to raw cold that bites through gloves. At a research station in Queen Maud Land, double-paned windows tremble. The whole building ticks and creaks as if the ice itself is speaking. In the lab, a screen flickers. Lines ripple across it like a heart monitor for a continent. Someone leans closer, headphone cushion pressed tight, breath fogging in a pale halo. The radar trace climbs, dips, and then steadies into something that should not be steady at all. Ice-penetrating radar sweeps again. The team expects scatter, the usual noise of layered snow and air pockets. Instead, the return comes back clean, cylindrical, and long. It runs for kilometres through ice thick enough to crush anything hollow. Yet the signature holds, edge to edge. A gloved finger taps the glass to mark the start point, then another tap marks the end point far down glacier. The numbers on the screen don't blink. If it were a melt channel, it would meander. This one does not meander. It runs straight, like a cut. They drag another sled out into the katabatic wind and set a different antenna, triple-checking cables with stiff hands. The second pass lines up with the first within meters. Pressure at that depth should deform any cavity into a sagging smear. Yet the profile keeps its shape. Supporters suggest structural walls. Critics counter that unknown ice physics could, in theory, mimic a tube. Either way, the curve refuses to wobble, and it forces the conversation into places people in warm offices avoid. History drifts in like snow across an old runway. In 1938, a German expedition mapped this same stretch of white. Officially, it marked routes for whalers. Unofficially, archival photographs show aluminum swastika markers dropped in neat intervals across Queen Maud Land. In another set of frames, aircraft wheel above domed mountains that appear hollowed under their crust. Some whisper that the team knew where to look before they arrived. The images sit in cabinets now, but the angles still raise eyebrows among those who have walked these ridges. A decade later, Operation High Jump brought ships, aircraft, and thousands of personnel south. The scale still surprises anyone who reads the manifest. The fleet left in force and returned early. The post-mission papers keep things dry. But the strange note remains. Admiral Byrd later spoke of enemy craft flying pole to pole at incredible speeds. The phrase echoes through hangars and late-night mess halls. Others dismiss it as Cold War theatre. Yet when modern radar paints straight voids under this same ice, the older stories feel less like whispers and more like a draft under a closed door. The lab lights buzz. On the central screen, a mosaic from NASA's Icebridge surveys overlays this sector. Broad patches glow where subglacial lakes sit under kilometres of ice. 3 of them line up like beads. Between them, thin channels run too straight for comfort. Magnetometer traces show anomalies along those lines. Metallic deposits are the safe answer. A different answer hints at something placed rather than formed. In the room, no one says either out loud. One of the younger analysts simply writes the numbers beside the channels and underlines them twice. Cartography throws its quiet spark onto the table. The Buache map, drawn in 1737, shows an ice-free Antarctica with river systems sketched like veins. Modern satellites later confirmed subglacial topography that looks eerily similar. The perfect match is debated, the echoes not. The notion that someone charted this coast before anyone admitted to seeing it keeps returning like a tide. Some whisper about older sources. Others prefer a lucky guess drawn from hearsay and currents. The map sits between them, calmly refusing to explain itself. In the ice cores, bubbles speak. They record sharp shifts roughly 12,000 years ago. layers that suggest a quick freeze after a warmer phase. Global myths of sudden flood, sudden fire and sudden cold live in the same time frame. Supporters suggest a cataclysm drove builders south, using the polar night as a vault. Critics counter that cause tell climate, not culture. Both statements can be true at once. The wind outside the station whistles through guy wires. It makes a low note the crew pretends not to hear. Modern eyes try to look down and find a curtain. Satellite technicians compare notes about odd patches over Queen Maud land. Perfect ovals go blurry. Coordinates shift by a fraction of a degree when you return to them later. One tech shrugs and calls it an artifact. Another marks the latitude and longitude on a scrap of paper and pins it to a corkboard in the break room. That small human act, the pin through the paper, feels like defiance against a grey smear on a screen. In the field, a team drives out toward a set of nunataks, rocky peaks like islands poking through the ice plain. The tyres grumble on hardpack, then slur on drifted snow. They stop where the radar shows negative space opening into a cylinder 500 metres below. The air is cut glass cold. The rig pings. The display rolls. A clean-sided void appears once more. It has measurable width. It has abrupt ends like caps. Supporters suggest doors. Others dismiss that as a projection born of long nights. The data remains black lines on green, indifferent to mood. The repository theory takes shape in whispers over instant coffee. Antarctica, the final cold vault. If a culture needed a place to store memory, this would do. Ice shields, muffles, and preserves. A library could sleep here for ages, wrapped in frost and pressure. Some whisper about heat rising from vents, faint thermal plumes that suggest breath beneath the miles. Others dismiss the idea as the romance of isolation. Still, the thought holds in the mind, simple and stubborn. If you needed a safe, you would choose the hardest place to reach. One of the older hands at the station keeps a small notebook that smells faintly of fuel and pencil lead. On the pages, he draws lines between the radar finds here, and coordinates he once jotted down from a different posting in the Mediterranean. Malta, a set of frequencies noted in a margin near a sketch of a chamber. He adds a dot for a Turkish plateau, and another for a Peruvian ridge. When he connects them, the lines lean towards symmetry. The pattern tilts in the lamplight, and a strange geometry peeks through the noise. Back at the console, the crew runs a long transect. The profile shows 3 voids connected by straight corridors. The lengths match integer ratios. A scientist scratches at the stubble under his beanie and says nothing. Ratios can be found anywhere if you go looking. They can also be used to build things that last. Supporters suggest intention in the numbers. Critics counter with statistics. The graph offers only its calm rhythm of peaks and hollow lanes. Outside, the aurora flickers a muted green behind cloud. The station's generator hums in a steady drone. A lone mechanic checks the fuel line with a gloved hand, then taps the gauge once for luck. Inside, someone overlays the Buache river paths on the Icebridge bathymetry. The lines wander and cross, then settle into a few clean correspondences. They are not perfect. They don't need to be. They press the mind toward an old idea. Knowledge travels in fragments and survives in strange places. Word leaks about the blurred ovals on a mapping app. A few coordinates circulate in private messages with grey timestamps. Someone posts them in a forum. Hours later, the tiles load a new set of pixels. The ovals fade into featureless white. A user writes glitch. Another writes update. The thread goes quiet. It's a small, modern silence, full of nothing and suggestion. In the station, the corkboard pin remains where it was placed. No one pulls it out. A thought returns to the room like a draft through a crack. Egypt's voids, Turkey's shafts, Malta's pitch-perfect chambers, South America's corridors warm to the touch, Europe's narrow veins that bend compasses, and here, the cold gate that may be a gate. Supporters suggest a network. Critics counter with coincidence dressed in charm. Yet when the dots connect themselves, even skeptics find they write more notes than they planned. The mechanic comes in from the cold, cheeks raw, and sets an enamel mug down with a clink. The small sound grounds the larger idea. If the ice hides a storehouse, what sleeps inside it? Texts on metal plates, stone maps etched with currents and angles, or nothing but wind-frozen hollows that tickle our pattern-hungry brains? The spectrum analyzer ticks off more scans. The numbers creep across the display with the patience of geology. In this place, haste feels out of place. The weather enforces humility. The horizon doesn't move much down here. It's a flat line that turns haze blue as the day drags and the sun circles without setting. People inside the station pin and unpin data, heat soup, repair boots, and breathe the dry air. They are the human scale in a landscape that swallows scale. They mark coordinates with dull pencils that leave smudges on their fingers. Those smudges carry a kind of proof. Bodies are here. Minds are trying. By night the wind climbs again. The windows sing a thin note. A radar sweep paints another cylinder, a twin to the first. The distances between them make a clean triangle with the subglacial lakes. Someone writes the triangle's angles in the notebook margin. It's an ordinary triangle, the kind a child could draw. It is also a hint that objects below are not random piles. Supporters suggest a blueprint. Others dismiss the comfort that blueprints give. The debate is old, the work continues. We leave the station with the view from above in mind. Dots on a globe, threads across water and rock. Some threads run along fault lines or magnetic latitudes where telluric current hums. Some threads seem to prefer straightness over terrain. The grid that begins to show itself isn't neat like graph paper, it's messy like life. But it leans stubbornly toward order. If there is a gate at the bottom of the world, it may never swing open for us. Or it may open just enough to let a single idea slip out and join the others in that notebook by the heater. Egypt, Turkey, Malta, South America, Europe, Antarctica. Lines tighten when you map them at scale. The pattern feels less like chance and more like someone clearing their throat in another room. We turn toward that sound, unsure if it comes from below, from memory, or from both at once. Pins bite into cork under your hands while thin red thread slides between your fingers. The room is low lit, a brass desk lamp pooling warm light over a spread of old charts and fresh printouts. Paper smells faintly damp, like rain that never arrived. A fan turns somewhere off to the side, pushing a slow draft that wavers the thread. As the lines settle, scattered coordinates stop behaving like noise. Giza steadies the first anchor. Derinkuyu takes the second. Malta joins, then a set of cold numbers from the Antarctic interior. The scatter tightens. Shapes hint at themselves. A pencil taps twice against the margin. Not much, just a soft metronome for thought. You nudge one pin half a centimetre west, cross-check a latitude, then press it back down. The thread leans and catches, and the geometry firms. What looked like a messy constellation starts to behave like a design you've seen before. Not a straight grid you'd lay over a parking lot. Something that curves with the planet and the pull of heat under stone. The kind of pattern a compass might respect before a ruler would. Here's where the data puts up its hand. Coordinates that looked random cluster along narrow bands. The bands track magnetism first, then fracture zones in the crust. Fault lines thread the map like healed scars, and the pins settle along them in runs that repeat across oceans. Critics counter that human settlement likes coastlines and river mouths, so of course lines appear. Yet the clusters stick to magnetic latitudes more than comfort. They hug seams in the crust where currents flow strongest, then echo the same angles on another continent. On the shelf, two rolled facsimiles lean and rustle when the fan comes around again. You uncap the rubber band and let an older map unfurl. Its coastlines are wrong in places and too right in others. Supporters suggest that long before modern seafaring, someone did careful survey work and handed fragments down. The suggestion sits uneasy on the desk. But the way these antique coastlines rhyme with reality is hard to ignore. The thread you pulled over modern coordinates finds that older ink and pauses there, as if recognising an address. The screen on your left wakes from sleep and shows a semi-transparent overlay. Ancient chart lines float above a modern geomagnetic map like two thin skins sliding into alignment. Where today's magnetic contours bend, the older outlines bend with them. The fit isn't perfect, but it's close enough to put a question in the room and let it stand. If these maps hold echoes of real surveying, then someone listened to the planet through a different instrument than we use now. Maybe rock, not sky. Maybe the ground itself. Electricity hides in the earth like water in a sponge, moving along what geologists call telluric currents. They run stronger where the crust is fractured or rich with metal. The pins on your board show an old habit of building along those paths. Sacred sites gather near copper belts and fault junctions, not exactly on top of them, but close enough to feel the charge, some whisper that was the point. If you shape stone in a place where the planet's quiet current brushes the surface, then the stone might answer back. Not magic, more like finding the right plug. You turn the dial on a small generator for a test coil and hear a soft drone. It's the same note every stormy day, when lightning stitches the sky and the globe flexes. The planet hums at a low frequency, a natural rhythm that always runs. In Malta's underground chamber, another note repeats around 110 cycles a second. It rings the ribs, then leaps across rooms. If you stack those tones in a simple scale, you land near a harmonic family. It feels less like coincidence and more like someone found a way to speak with the ground in a language the body already uses. Stories line up along those paths too. In one set of tales, a dragon sleeps in the mountain, and you walk carefully to avoid waking it. In another, elders sing paths across the land and find water in the right verse. Far north and west, lines of old standing stones were said to mark ways where the air felt cleaner and the mind steadier. Different names, same idea. Invisible routes that sensible people used, whether they called it luck, tradition, or a craft you only talk about in a whisper. Out beyond the study, storm clouds knock at the windows. You pull fresh satellite prints into the lamp's circle. A path of faint negative space traces from central Anatolia toward the Mediterranean shelf. It's not a road and not a riverbed. It reads like a buried corridor, long and narrow, then vanishing under modern coastal towns. You flip to a different continent and see clean, parallel lines along a South American ridge. They don't care about slopes or drainage. They run straight through both, the way human design often does when machines won't bend for terrain. At this point, the board stops looking like your project and starts acting like it has a mind of its own. The thread runs and crosses places that shouldn't share a plan. A cave city dug into ashflow tuff, a resonant catacomb carved in limestone, heat-marked corridors under a high-altitude range, frozen voids deep in polar ice. None of them are neighbours, but the angles repeat. The same tilt of a corridor ceiling, the same ratio in a shaft's width to its height. How does a habit travel that far without a shared engineer or a steel wire? You find yourself backing up your chair to see the whole board at once. The fan's rotation comes around and raises one thread a fraction of an inch. The slight lift introduces a new line of sight that wasn't there a second ago. Two pins that felt unrelated now share a groove along the same magnetic latitude. Their distances and angles repeat in a second pair on the other side of the map. Others dismiss this as the brain's hunger for patterns. Maybe, but the geometry keeps winning coin flips it shouldn't. A sticky note on the desk carries a small list. Copper belt, basalt fields, sandstone shelf. Each item matches a spot where the threads thicken. The materials themselves matter. Basalt can carry charge and amplify certain tones. Sandstone breathes and tempers humidity. Copper veins pull current along like a leash. Builders who learned by listening would keep those quirks, repeat them until they became rules. Then the rules would turn into roots. The generator's drone fades as the dial clicks off. The room settles, and the only sound is the gentle tick of the fan's bearings. Your forearm rests on the desk edge, and the corkboard grit presses lightly against the skin. This is the human scale of grand patterns. A hand on a map, a thumb smoothing a thread, a person deciding where to place the next pin and trusting a mix of math, story, and a sense you can't name but feel anyway. That mix built a lot more than charts. There's a caution here that sits alongside the thrill. Maps like these have misled armies and dreamers for centuries. You draw a line, then you make the world fit the line. Critics counter that we risk chasing phantoms across the globe, while the answers sit in plain soil. Fair enough. But when modern data quietly agrees with old hints, the pull gets harder to ignore. The thought isn't that someone mapped every shore. The thought is that someone knew where the earth itself liked to sing, and they built where the note was strongest. You test one thread's tension and follow it with your eyes through 4 pins. The line curves gently and drives toward a region where volcanism once wrote the ground in hot script. Those places are louder, electrically speaking. They also tend to hold caves that breathe and stone that carries vibration easily. Add people who knew how to carve without letting fresh air vanish, and you have corridors that do more than move bodies. They might have moved ideas the way wires move messages. That thought pushes a new question into the space between lamp and board. If a network existed, could it have carried more than travellers and grain? Some whisper about communication that didn't need words, sound moving through tuned stone, a pulse travelling along a vein of metal. The human body responding inside the structure, not as a receiver you hold, but as the receiver you are. The structure itself becomes the signal path. It's a large claim. It sits here anyway. Back on the screen, layers pile up. Topography, magnetics, earthquake density. The pins hardly shift as you bring each new data skin forward. Instead, the place names change colour. What was a legend becomes a red dot. What was a rumour becomes a minor paper in a small journal no one reads until they need it. Each layer is a simple thing. Together, they ask the bigger thing out loud even if your mouth doesn't. Who knew this much? And when? Your pencil makes a small mark next to a coastal coordinate. A harbour that now hosts ferries and weekend fish markets sits on the same line as a Bronze Age shrine nobody visits after dusk. The pin at the shrine doesn't just sit near a fault. It tags a spot where 2 crustal currents converge. That's a place where modern engineers put sensors and watch the graph jump during storms. It's also a place where old stories say the ground answered prayers with a breath of wind from below. The room cools as the air shifts and the paper edges lift. You pin a loose corner, then step back just enough to see the words you wrote at the top of the board at the start of the night. Global grid? The question mark was big when you wrote it. It looks smaller now. Not because the evidence turned into proof, but because the islands of fact have built small bridges. They hold your weight for a second or 2 at a time, long enough to cross to the next plank and not fall. What counts as a bridge? An old map that skews right where it shouldn't. A chamber that rings at a precise tone. A corridor that tracks the compass instead of the shortest route. A valley where lightning hits more than chance would allow. A cave where breath flows out of a seam at noon and sinks back in at dusk. If you collect enough of these small pieces and lay them out, they call to each other. You can hear that call if the room is quiet. Outside, a single car passes and sends a faint vibration through the floorboards. It's a reminder that we still build with the same instincts. We put data under mountains and airplanes along great circle routes. We love straight lines until the world turns, then we bow to curves. The people who planted our oldest anchors did that dance with better shoes than we remember. Or maybe just more time to learn the steps. You adjust one last thread, then let your hand rest. The board now shows brighter regions where the lines thicken, and dimmer stretches where they cross empty sea. The mix feels less like decoration, and more like function. If it is function, then there were builders. If there were builders, then someone maintained the thing that threads these places together. Maintenance means intent, and intent always leads to motive. That's the next room you haven't walked into yet. The lamp hums softly as its filament warms the air above the shade. On the board, the lines have stopped moving. They sit and hum with a kind of quiet authority. You can almost see a pulse travel the length of one arc and slip into another, the way a current jumps between branches in a tree. Not proof, just a feeling that hangs in the air long enough to keep you from turning the light off. The frame widens in your mind until the walls are gone and the board floats over dark oceans and snowfields. Red threads tighten into arcs that kiss at ancient capitals, river mouths, and high plateaus. They run south into cold where only instruments can follow. They rise through green islands and drop into deserts that still hold breath under dunes. Somewhere behind the map, something old holds the pattern steady. The question waiting there is simple and heavy at the same time. Who laid these lines, and who kept them alive long enough for you to find them again in the lamp's glow? Wind bells tap gently along the eaves, a thin metallic chime that rides the cold air before fading into the white breath of the mountains. Dawn climbs the ridgelines in bands of pale gold. Yak butter lamps warm the entry of a monastery, and frost clings to prayer flags like a thin crust of sugar. Inside, an old caretaker smooths a corner of a cloth-wrapped bundle and unrolls a stiff page. The ink is brown, edges brittle, yet the shapes still carry purpose. Lines threading under peaks, circles marked like nodes, notes in a careful hand where valleys end and stone begins. The script names corridors as if they were rivers and gives them the same verbs: flowing, branching, crossing, vanishing into the root of the mountain. He touches a fingertip to a mark that looks like an eye set in granite, then traces a path curving beneath a ridge known locally for the way thunder wraps around it twice. The page mentions Agartha the way a sailor names a current. Not as a dream, but like a place you could miss if you don't catch the turn. Some whisper that these pages are copies of older pages, rescues from libraries that moved as the Earth did, preserved by those who believed knowledge should travel under storms. Decades ago, a traveller sat with lamas who spoke of tunnels of light, not lantern-lit halls, but channels said to glow on their own, like winter stars trapped in rock. His notes describe a refuge made not in panic, but in patience. He writes that after a world-ending flood, radiant beings kept libraries below ground. Their halls entered through secret gates in deserts and mountains. Supporters suggest his account recorded more than stories. They argue he caught a memory being passed hand to hand by men who knew that doors close best in the dark. The air outside thins as the sun climbs, and even the wind grows careful. In this altitude hush, Shambhala holds two meanings at once. You hear it in the way monks speak the word. A pure land for the spirit, yes, but some teachings map corridors in the same breath. They give distances in days, namestone, note water flow and echo. They treat temples not only as places of prayer, but as junctions. Critics counter that we misread metaphor as masonry. Yet the texts point to specific entrances and mark them closed after quakes, as though the fabric of belief includes a lock and a key carved in rock. The symmetry stretches across the continent. Chinese masters walk mountain spines and speak of dragon paths that carry breath through stone, choosing shrines where the terrain swallows wind then returns it warm. In India, the old stories send serpents into the ground as guardians of tunnels, their coils mapped like braided cords under riverbeds and stupas. Two creatures, two mythic skins, one behaviour. They travel beneath the world in corridors that do not chase the surface but keep their own logic, veering for reasons the ground itself might feel. A British climber in the 1920s wrote a short letter home from Lhasa. He'd seen a stairway that began at a cliff wall near the palace and stepped into the mountain as if the stone had decided to fold inward. The faces of the steps were smooth and wide enough for two men to carry a load without turning sideways. After earthquakes, he said, the valley was a spill of dust, yet wind still whistled from the gap like breath from a flute. Then work crews bricked the opening and moved on. The letter ends with a mark on a rough sketch and a sentence cut short by spilled tea. Modern instruments speak without poetry, and their data can be stubborn. Even so, seismic imaging has outlined hollow zones deep below the Himalayas that refuse easy labels. These shapes do not match magma pockets or expected cavities. They run long and narrow, low in height and consistent in width, like someone pressed a blade through bread. Some researchers call them resonance chambers, because sound behaves oddly there on models. It stacks and cancels in regular patterns as if the walls were tuned. If you want something your hands can touch, walk east to Longyu. Farmers drained a pond in 1992 and found a carved hall lurking under the water, then another. 24 caverns so large a man walking their floors feels small as a sparrow under a bridge. The walls all bear the same ridged chisel lines. Each ridge is almost the width of a thumb, no more no less, running in parallel for meters without drifting. By one estimate, nearly 1 million cubic meters of stone left those rooms, yet no dump site has a scar that fits. Others dismiss the advanced technology angle and say ancient teams worked for generations and hid the spoil well. Still, the sameness in finish suggests a system more than a gesture. Set Longyu beside the pages in the monastery and the picture sharpens. One tradition maps corridors like veins, another presents caverns that could be junctions on that map. Supporters suggest that Agartha and Shambhala might be the echo forms of a network that existed in rock, the way a city lives under streets. Not a single empire under another name, but a shared answer spread across domains and dynasties, to a problem that kept returning. Sometimes the sky fails. In the tales when the sky fell, Asia's mountains did not merely shelter villagers, gods retreated. Sages closed doors and promised to wait. The West tells the same story with engineers and archives. The form changes, the motion does not. You can feel the rhyme when people describe the world as breaking above and steadying below. The phrase last refuge lands like a stone on a still pond. The rings keep moving outward. If you ask a monk why the corridors would be mapped, he might shrug. To find them again, to teach without saying the words aloud. Brick by brick, the ideas moved. A teacher learns a chant that equals a stair count. A bell tone in one temple matches a turn far away. When quakes shifted the rock, they struck the names from the pages and left the ratios. They trusted rhythm and number more than lines. The dragon paths and Naga stories make a second kind of sense through the lens of energy. People talk of chi and prana the way a geologist speaks of stress. A valley holds, a ridge releases, tunnels follow those flows, not the quickest routes. If a cave system could carry more than bodies, if it could route sound or heat or breath, the design might start to look like what the lamas describe, luminous because it moves what the world already makes. A caretaker in a Himalayan village keeps a small ledger. He notes the odd repeat of wind on certain days, how it breathes in the cistern under his floor and returns through a crack in the wall of the kitchen. He taps the stones near the hearth and listens for where the note throbs, then drags the stove an inch to settle it. He jokes that dinner cooks faster, but he also shuts the shutters when he hears the long tone roll under the hill. He says the old monastery bells learned that tone first. Another monk carries a lantern into a carved passage near a ridge shrine after a landslip reveals a doorframe. He holds the glass and watches the flame bend toward the crack in the floor, steady as if a hand pulled it. He claps once. The echo returns in a stack, each return an even step lower. He counts them with a finger in the air, smiling like a man meeting an old friend. Then he walks back to the entry and seals it with stones. He writes a number on the wall, he will not say it aloud. The Longyu caverns also breathe. Stand near a pillar and feel a soft draft move past your calves, not from an open hole but through the masonry itself. Put your ear to a wall and the distant sound carries like a string being plucked where you cannot see the musician. The ridges carved into the stone might be ornament, or they might be a memory of the tool. Some whisper those ridges could be the trace of a resonance tool that softened the rock by vibrating it, then hardened it again as the tool moved on. Others dismiss this as a story built on patterns, yet the pattern holds its calm stare. Agartha and Shambhala sit between the literal and the whispered. Many listeners hold them as metaphors for inner work. Some readers in old halls point to the hard details, distances, counts, locks, timings. The two readings do not have to fight. The mountain can be both book and bunker. The stair can be both practice and passage. If a crisis left little above ground to hold a line, then embedding the line in liturgy and limestone would be the kind of trick an old world might try. When the earth shuddered, stairways got sealed, but the wind kept whistling behind the bricks. That sound carries a simple lesson. Sealing an entry does not erase a path. The path finds another door. Or the memory of the door stays in the stone and waits for the same tone to wake it. Across Asia, temples chose ridgelines where lightning chatters all summer. They place shrines where the ground drinks rain and keeps it cold. They carved bell chambers that make a tone that sits just right in the chest. They built with a long view, toward winter, toward flood cycles, toward the kind of day when walking down means living through the season. They left little notes in the way sound turns corners and the way a passage lets light travel only at noon on a certain calendar day. A traveller who has never heard these stories might lean over a mountain stream and fill a cup. The water tastes metallic in a way he cannot name. He follows the stream uphill and finds a stone outcrop shaded by dwarf pines. A fox scat slips into a crack and disappears. He sees nothing more. But later that night, when the wind slides down the slope, his tent rope vibrates without moving the fabric. He thinks of the fox and the crack and does not sleep right away. The network theory hangs in the air like fine dust. Supporters suggest that the tunnels linked shrines as much as towns, building a second map under the first, drawn to survive drought, fire or invasion, and to conduct lessons between safe rooms. From this view, the great mountain states were not ignoring the ground. They were conversing with it. They were telling it, stay open here and sleep there. If we come back, remember us. The skeptical view keeps the discussion honest. Mountain weather creates cavities. Seismic waves find odd paths. Oral tradition loves a good door that only opens for the worthy. We could be seeing patterns where none exist. Critics counter with patience, and patience is welcome. The work of knowing takes more than a chime in the wind. But the ledger grows. A stairway in a cliff face, a map in a cloth bundle, a breathing hall under a drained pond, until the mind holds two pictures at once and lets them both stand. Agartha in this late hour is a word that softens when you think it. It feels like walking through a corridor where the temperature rises 1 degree at a time, then drops back to the original near the exit. Shambhala feels like watching two monks exchange glances when a bell hits a tone it rarely finds, and both note it without speaking. If you ask for coordinates, you might receive a story instead. If you ask for a story, your guide might show you a stone. Survival cuts across beliefs. When the sky fails, even kings look for basements. The West puts engineers in hard hats with clipboards. The Himalayas give sages with mantras that line up like stair counts. The function converges. So does the memory. The differences are in the costumes, not the plan. Let the idea widen, and it picks up others. In some accounts, the doors were not only for going in, they were for coming out. Not a retreat locked for ages, but a pause before a return. Across another ocean, an older people speak of pale helpers who rose from the ground when fire fell and led families into safety. The thread shifts from refuge to rescue, and the map turns to meet it in the dark. Red dust drifts like embers in slow air. The mesa holds the day's heat, and the wind has fallen to a low breath that carries sage and ash. An elder sits near the edge where the rock breaks to sky, his hands lined like dry creek beds. He draws a spiral with a fingertip in the sand. Children settle around him, knees knocking, hair crusted with grit, eyes fixed not on him, but on the pattern growing wider with each turn. He doesn't hurry. He marks a small doorway at the centre of the spiral, then a ladder, and the sound of loose grains moving under his touch is the only noise for a long moment. You taste dust on the tongue and a little bitterness, like smoke that never quite leaves a house. The mesa waits, and the old story comes in a lower voice. There was a time when fire fell. The memory holds texture. Air burned and carried the flavour of metal. The ground cracked like sun-baked pottery, seams opening under bare feet. People ran, and the sky didn't help. From the earth's seams came pale figures with wide eyes, not human, their skin the colour of cooled clay. They moved with a steady quiet and pointed toward doorways hidden in the stone. Those who followed found steps cut into darkness. They bent their heads and went down. In the tunnels the air cooled, and the echo of breathing was louder than any word. Food waits in baskets. Hands show how to store corn in dry chambers, how to tend small crops where no sun reaches, how to sleep when the world above keeps breaking. Supporters suggest these beings lived below, or knew a way of life there, teaching by example rather than speech. Others dismiss the tale as a metaphor for wisdom found in hardship. The elder does not argue. He draws another spiral and taps its centre with one knuckle, once. A kiva sits not far from the mesa edge, round and cut into the earth with timber overhead and a small hole in the floor that leads to nothing a child can crawl through. That opening has a name whispered during rites, a reminder of where people came from in the first times. Down its ladder the air loses heat. The walls hold drawings made by hands that carried smoke on their skin. There are spirals like the one in the sand, narrow lines that kink and turn as if following a canyon underground. Ladder shapes climb from one line to another. Small figures with bulb heads carry what look like torches or seed bundles. The forms are simple, but they map movement and passage. When a light traces along the wall, you feel the old rhythm of feet, the cough of dust, the click of stone on stone. These aren't just pictures, they're a ledger of roots. And that small hole in the floor? It's both a symbol and a direction. It points down. The elder's fingertip cleaned it last week, and the dust that came out smelled like time held its breath. North and east, beyond these mesas, a different dark waits under hills made of old limestone. Beneath forest and pasture land lies a world of tunnels and chambers that continue past the reach of clear maps. Some call it the largest known cave system on Earth. In that press of stone, soot stains run like moth wings above ancient fire sites. 10,000 years may pass and the black still marks the ceiling. Flint chips lie where hands once hammered, their edges dulled by time. There are pits where people mined mineral for tools, torch sticks carbonized and left beside roots like small anchors in the mind. This way, keep going, keep the wall to the right. It's quiet in those halls, but you can hear drip water count seconds and the scratch of your own shoe against calcite. The scale isn't guesswork. It's measured in hundreds of kilometres of mapped passage, and the rest whispered by drafts that smell of wet stone and leaf rot far from any surface door. The old stories repeat in other tongues. Apache talk of fires that swept plains and the need to run into the hills where the ground opens and breathes. Cherokee recite cycles of worlds, some undone by flood or flame, each time a few guided to protection below. Navajo carry a ladder motif too, worlds stacked and climbable, when the one above will not hold life. These aren't copies of each other, they grew apart across distances and time, but they hold a shared direction, down in danger, up in renewal. The teachers are different by name and shape, but they appear when the sky fails. Some whisper, "This is myth echo." Others hear a pattern that might encode how people survived real disaster long enough to preserve language and maps in their heads. The detail that sticks is practical: where to go, how to move, how to wait out a season of ruin. Modern rumours surface where mesas break to harsh wind again. In the late 20th century, talk rose around a mountain of rock near a small town in New Mexico. Stories said the ground underneath was honeycombed with steel doors and freight elevators, a maze cut by hands that kept schedules and secrets. Whistleblowers spoke of corridors that linked to older rock halls. Critics counter that the tale grew as our age sought its own underworld, a mirror for fears and a stage for control. The effect is the same. The mind points downward when it imagines hidden work. The archetype survives because it is simple and strong. Power keeps its heart under the skin, away from weather and eyes. Geology backs the habit. The limestone belt that runs under wide swaths of the continent isn't solid like concrete. Water eats it into voids and rivers that never meet the sun. In certain regions, you can trace connected systems by how the air moves through sinkholes on far hills, by how a creek vanishes and rises warmer miles later. Satellite moisture readings show long damp signatures beneath farmland that has no surface stream. Survey lines stop where private land begins or where a cave drops past what rope on a shoulder can handle. Past those edges, the map goes back to myth. The potential is not romantic, it's practical. You can cross unseen if you know the turnings, and ridge to ridge may be possible without a single step above ground. For people facing a sky that burns or a flood that swallows valleys, such paths are the line between story and silence. Once in a while, a caver crawls a squeeze passage and stands up into an amphitheatre of rock where sound comes back with a hollow thump. The helmet beam hits not just mineral and stalactite, but marks. Parallel lines pecked into wall, spirals that match the elders, stick figures, handprints, runs of dots where a stroke counted days or steps. These aren't accidents or mineral tricks. Someone crawled here, rested here, and pressed meaning into the stone before moving on. The style is of the people above. It doesn't change with the depth. It means they didn't stop being themselves when they went below. They brought their language and kept using it with a lamp wedged against a stone lip to free their hands. The finger that drew spirals in sand once traced them in lamp smoke on limestone. Knowing that makes the line from the mesa to the cave direct enough to follow with the mind. In kivas, the small hole in the floor is treated with more respect than words can carry. It gets brushed clear, and offerings get set beside it. It stands for a place below, for the memory of ascent. For the door you don't open casually. The ceremony keeps the bridge alive between levels of the world. That habit might be ritual, or it might be instruction. The first teaches to remember. The second teaches what to do when smoke tastes like metal again. The difference matters when you plan for children to listen and carry the story. Some whisper that the discipline of going down teaches patience older than war. Others dismiss the idea that a ceremony could teach survival and call it poetry for hard times. The debate misses an important detail. The body learns by doing. Descending a ladder by torchlight builds a map in muscle and eye. If the day comes when you need to use it, the body does not freeze. There's a question hanging under all these tunnels. Why do we insist on salvation underfoot rather than over the horizon? Part of it is simple. Below is cool when fire roams. Below is stable when the air twists and tears roofs. Below drops the noise and brings the heartbeat back to a slower rate. There's another layer. The ground takes what we give it and keeps the form, whether corn in a pot or words pressed into a wall. Underworld stories feel like memory storage. Not just for grain and tools, but for ways of living that can be carried out after the surface forgets itself. A womb and a grave are both dark and close. One leads back up, the other doesn't. People carry both truths at once and tell them in the same breath. That double truth shows in how the stories end. They don't close with triumph. They come back to the ladder. The last rung creaks. The first sun is too bright to see through. The air feels sharp in the lungs in a good way. The ones who come up carry seeds, songs, and the memory of how to go back down if they must. The teachers vanish. Whether they walked away in daylight or sealed the door behind them, the debt remains. In stories, a debt isn't a bill, it's a link. You pass it forward by treating passageways with care, by keeping children quiet when you open a door. Across oceans, a pattern goes soft but doesn't die. Flames rise high in a tale from one shore. Cold freezes the world in a tale from another. Floodwater levels everything somewhere else. Each time, refuge lies in a chamber under the surface, guarded by beings who know how to wait out a season where the sky breaks its promise. The names change, icons adjust, the direction doesn't. Down, then back up when the sky calms, then down again if the sky fails. The map gets drawn in sand, then carved on wood beams, then scratched into stone or copied into delicate script. It shows options when panic steals choice. It tells a method more than a plot. In our own age, elevator shafts drop in office towers and emergency stairwells glow green in the dark with arrows pointing toward basements. Subways carry the day's weight under streets and feel like a low tide inside concrete. Seed vaults lie under mountain rock. Data warms air in rooms with no windows. We haven't abandoned the habit. We refine it with steel and codes, and we still draw spirals in new media. The spiral is the scrolling motion of a thumb. A modern rumour spirals outward, and at its centre sits a doorway blurred with warning signs. Critics counter that these echoes are just present-day anxieties poured into an old mould. Supporters suggest the mould exists because it works. The elder's hand lifts from the sand, wind smudges a line. A little boy reaches forward and repairs the break with a quick stroke. A girl sets a small stone on the centre hole. The elder nods. On the mesa, the sun runs lower, turning the skin of the rock a colour that looks like a banked coal. He says nothing, then adds a short line that wasn't there a moment ago, connecting the spiral to an edge where the sand meets a darker strip of hard-packed ground. It reads like a path you could walk, short but useful. He cups his hand and breathes once into the little doorway, as if warming it before night. Down in the far limestone, a caver checks his light and hears how his breath comes back to him, off-layered rock. He steadies a hand on a wall and steps over a slick fall where a trickle has cut the floor. His lamp snags a mark and stays on it. He doesn't try to read the meaning. He notes the place and the angle, marks it in a notebook. He puts the book away and moves on. It's small, it's enough. Above him, storm fronts slide on rails, and the last light drops through trees that have built roots around holes that lead to nobody's map. The mind keeps wanting a single author for a pattern this wide. That's a natural impulse. It feels tidy. But the strong evidence points to something else. Many hands, many ages, facing versions of the same problem and reaching for the same solution buried in a rock. The underworld they chose holds more than safety. It keeps a template for how to endure. Maybe the pale guides were people who learned the dark and let their eyes adjust. Maybe they were metaphor wearing bodies to cross 1,000 years intact. The story behaves the same either way. It shows you a door where a wall seems to block you. Dust lifts again when a child stands. The line remains. The ladder waits. And far from these mesas, old land breaks into scarps that carry different names but hold the same habit of stone shaped from top down and bottom up. Tales say the deepest corridors run under the oldest soils, past where the first fires were kept, and where rivers once crossed deserts that now lie open to the sky. If that is so, the next door in this chain may open under another sun, where the bedrock is ancient and the songs burn low with age. The stories turn their faces that way, and the ground seems to listen. Africa's first heartbeat might not have sounded under open sky at all. It may have started lower, where air cools against stone and daylight arrives as a narrow blade. The oldest stories rise from this continent, yet the ground here keeps its mouth closed. If humanity began in Africa, the strange twist is this. The oldest land holds the faintest trace of its earliest underground record, as though pages were torn out and buried somewhere deeper than our usual tools can reach. You feel that paradox strongest in Ethiopia, where Lalibela wears its churches like negative space. Builders cut down through volcanic tuff, not up, revealing buildings by removing the world around them. 11 sanctuaries stand inside trenches, linked by narrow passages and shadowed courtyards. A priest's hand brushes a wall, and a low chant lifts from the stone, the sound clean and focused. Light falls from tight openings far above, and the rooms respond like tuning forks. It's not just visual. You sense airflow moving in patterns, drawn by channels that look as planned as an aqueduct, yet achieved in the partial darkness of limestone bulbs and oil lamps. The Church of St. George anchors the complex like a compass point. It sits fully contained within the earth, cross-shaped and balanced, the trench dropping perhaps 100 feet around it on all sides. Trenches, tunnels and hidden cells tie the structures together. Supporters suggest this, from below upward method, was more than an engineering style. It shaped how sound and temperature behave, how crowds could meet without heat building into discomfort. Critics counter that without modern surveys, planning such a precise matrix would have been improbable. And yet the spaces exist, cool and measured, delivering proof in the simplest way. A voice carries, a candle does not flicker, and rainwater disappears along tidy lines cut into rock. Reverse engineering these churches turns into a quiet puzzle. Watercourses slip beneath thresholds, feed cisterns and drain without pooling. Ventilation shafts find each other as if drawn by a hidden template. No chalk lines, no schematic fragments survive to explain how the geometry was set, only the fact that it holds. You watch a deacon lift a door carved from the same living rock as the wall around it, hinged by peg and patience, and you get the sense of a plan that served more than ritual. Some whisper the builders listened to the rock's own grain, basalt layered and resonant, using sound to test for hollows and fault lines, choosing cut paths where the stone would carry a voice rather than swallow it. Walk south in the mind's map and the plateau loosens into savannas and granite kopjes, where Zimbabwe's great enclosure rests like a coiled thought. Its curving walls stand without mortar, their joints neat, the surfaces blind to the wind that presses through the valley. Oral traditions call out tunnels of the ancestors, routes believed to connect stone circles spread across miles. Past explorers noted cool draughts rising from cracks that do not open to any obvious chamber, the air steady as if drawn along a larger body. Others dismiss this as the breath of the earth, a simple temperature gradient. Maybe. But local guides still point to spots where the ground hums, a tiny tremor underfoot, and say the old routes are there, only sealed. Certain paths around the enclosure pass over subtle ridges that feel less natural with each step. At night, insects soften, and you hear a faint wind travelling beneath the thorn scrub. The walls themselves seem to listen, and it's easy to think that a planner once stood here and traced lines outward toward other nodes. Not roads in the usual sense. Arteries hidden below sightlines and seasons wear. This is where the theory turns. Supporters suggest the tunnels formed a network for movement and message, masked by the terrain and used when conflict or weather demanded refuge. Critics counter that without excavated proof, airflow alone does not make a city. The argument lifts and fades, the drafts keep flowing. Further south, the land tilts toward Mpumalanga, where a ring of stones called Adam's Calendar stands among thousands of circular ruins, scattered like quiet equations. The formation aligns with sunrises and sunsets across the year, the nearby hills dotted with wall foundations that fold into each other like honeycomb. Satellite images show regular anomalies beneath these fields, consistent patterns in soil response, as if voids run in careful bands under the grass. Michael Tellinger has tied the site to ancient mining, claiming this whole region once pulsed with extraction and industry. It remains controversial, a story that draws strong debate. But the density of ruins and the repeating subsurface marks make one question surface-only narratives. Something systematic happened here, even if the data won't yet say what. On the coast or inland, you meet farmers who lead you past dry stone rings to places where the ground gives a little under a heel. A hand sweeps aside grass, and a dark slit appears. Toss in a seed pod. You count. A second passes, 3, then a click from below. Not water, space. The openings are too tight to enter without ropes and permission. Most go undocumented. The pattern holds anyway, an insistence that beneath these circles lie lines that prefer straightness to slope, as if someone cored the earth with awareness of magnet and field. North again to Libya's Gilf Kebir, where a high plateau rises from sand like a book closed for 1,000 years. Travellers talk about mirages and the way the air tastes dry enough to sting. When satellite eyes sweep across it, the data sometimes returns straight tracks, geometric bands, a grid implied rather than shown. NASA metadata flagged hundreds of linear anomalies under dunes in that region. It's a restricted zone, hard to reach and harder to work. That means the marks stay as images and hints, the kind of evidence that sort of shouts from behind a curtain. Supporters suggest engineered spaces, corridors buried by climate and time. Others dismiss them as dried channels and artifact lines in remote sensing. With few boots on that ground, the debate becomes its own desert, and the horizon doesn't move. Return to Lalibela with fresh ears, and the legends of angels feel less like myth, and more like a builder's shorthand for harmony. Stories say workers were helped by beings of light in the long night, a poetic way of describing knowledge that moves as if guided. If you think about stone that amplifies certain tones, about shafts that pull air in predictable rhythms, then angelic could be a cultural name for physics turned sacred. This reframing doesn't diminish the faith that shaped these churches, it grounds it. The chant fits the cavity answers. Geology supports the idea that East Africa lends itself to this craft. The rift drags the crust open. Lava once ran in rivers, then cooled into tubes strong enough to hold form when surrounding flows eroded. Basalt stacks and splits into columns. Its density shapes sound, sending some frequencies along its length better than others. A cautious ear can read these clues after a while. Tap at a wall, and the note's decay lengthens when the rock opens to any hidden void. Hold a palm to the surface and you can feel where air finds a colder path. No special machine required, just patience and time to learn how stone behaves. Small signs survive in villages that flank old routes. A mason aligns a doorway with a standing tree because it faces the wind correctly. A singer tells you songs change pitch between seasons because the rooms demand it, not because the choir is different. Line up enough details like that across Ethiopia, Zimbabwe and South Africa, and you end up with a low-resolution image of memory that never made it to papyrus or parchment, but lived through practice. The way we hand down bread recipes without ever writing them, yet they taste the same a century on. Restricted sites complicate the hunt. In North Africa, unrest and policy seal entire districts, making even modest surveys difficult. Funding stutters. Security overrides curiosity. You meet a road crew who dug a routine trench and stopped cold when their spade hit hollow. They called it in. The gap got filled and flagged, and the team moved on. Not secrecy with teeth. More like a default setting. When unknown space appears underfoot, we tend to cover it and keep going. The record falls quiet and the questions settle back into the dust. Still, the ground gives away more than it intends. In dry months, temperature differences can draw wind into narrow cuttings. Stand on a ridge at dusk, and you can hear faint whistling from rock that looks featureless in daylight. Walk over the great enclosure's curves after rain, and notice how water avoids certain stones and races along others, like a hidden gutter. Trace it far enough, and your feet return to a low depression, where the air feels cooler than it should. It repeats often enough to suggest intention. Whether that intention belonged to monarchs, miners, monks, or a mixture of all three, that's where speculation lives. There's also the human cost embedded in the stone. Carving down in Lalibela took labour measured in calluses and years. Even if workers found natural joints and followed lines that fractured cleanly, the volume of removed material is staggering. Families would have grown old in the time it took to free one sanctuary. The reward is a place where temperature stays steady, and the world above can turn chaotic without breaking the space below. In an age of siege or disease, that reliability isn't mystical, it's survival. Rotate back to the wider pattern, and Africa's set of clues aligns with what we've been seeing elsewhere. vertical descent instead of broad entrance, shafts that find magnet and airflow, surfaces tuned to voice, sites arrayed where geology sets the conditions, not where landscape flatters the eye. Those same traits show up across the Mediterranean and down into the Andes, changing materials and myths, but keeping the core. Here, the language is more spare, the access more limited, and the gaps between finds wider. That might be the point. If someone meant to hide a network, the most obvious birthplace would be the last place to leave the clearest trace. A final turn before we move on. The ground hums in certain places, and instruments pick it up as normal microseisms, the rumble of ocean and weather travelling through rock. In a tunnel or chamber cut along basalt's grain, that hum can swell or fade based on angles you can sketch on a notepad. It implies that builders who paid attention to sound could do more than just keep smoke moving. They could ride the Earth's own rhythms to calm a crowd, carry a prayer, or keep time. If the pattern across Africa points to anything, it's that precision did not require metal blades and lasers. It required listening hard enough to treat stone as a partner. We'll need that mindset for the next step. The geometry grows even sharper, and the alignments start to behave like instructions rather than ornaments. If the same ratios echo from one continent to the next, we have to ask how such exactness spread, and whether the tools were simpler, stranger, or both. The lab is dim enough that the laser lines look like strings of red light pulled tight across stone. A technician steadies a granite block with one hand and brings the calipers in with the other, reading a tolerance that should not belong to the ancient world. The air smells faintly of oil and warm electronics. A low hum rolls through the benches where oscilloscopes blink in green. You can hear the tiny scrape of a pencil, marking a margin on a printout. A number circled twice, then underlined once more as if the graphite can make the measurement behave. Across the table, a set of cores sits in order. Limestone, basalt, quartz-rich breccia, rose granite. The laser sweeps their faces, mapping subtle warps and perfect flats in the same slow pass. On the wall, enlarged photographs of tool marks from caves and tunnels flicker in rotation. Tight parallel striations in one frame, mirror-dark polish in the next. The pattern tilts in the light, and its meaning sharpens. The same signatures appear across continents where no documented trade manuals or guilds link the hands that carved them. What draws attention first is the convergence. Right angles cut through solid bedrock in places where straight geometry should have fought the grain. Shafts that line up to magnetic north within a small fraction of a degree, as if the builders trusted the sky's invisible field more than the horizon. Ventilation that isn't guesswork but math. Duct widths, stepping down in measured ratios, turns placed where turbulence would break, chambers shaped to slow, then settle, then clear. Supporters suggest these repeated elements are not style, but syntax, a technical language you can read in stone from Malta to Peru. Then the lab runs its modest experiment. Copper chisels, annealed and hammered true, meet limestone under controlled pressure. A metronome ticks to keep the test honest. The bit bites, then mushes, edges curl. The chisel spends more time at the grinder than at the block. Millimeters surrender slowly. Hours pass. The surface satins but will not shine. Yet in field photos, some chambers reach a gloss that throws light like water. Others dismiss the mismatch as lost technique, but lost technique still leaves scars. Here the question is not if copper can cut. It is how that cut became this finish, without the chatter and bite that copper usually sings into stone. Footage from Cappadocia plays beside a modern tunnelling readout, and the comparison feels wrong in a way that keeps you awake. Our machines like wide arcs and predictable radius turns. The old corridors snake, then resolve, holding tolerances on curves that mirror the machine, not the hand. Wall finishes read clean from ankle to ceiling. Junctions repeat their geometry dozens of meters apart, a sign that someone checked and rechecked angles with a system, not a guess. You look at the scan and think of rotary heads and steady torque. Then you look at the date, and the mind pauses at the edge of the page. Architect visiting Malta's underground map ratios and find a run of numbers that repeat. 1 to square root of 2 shows up in niche widths and door heights. Golden proportion threads through distances between chambers, then reappears in the way a ceiling flares near a speaking point. It's a quiet rabbit hole. These same relations live in crystalline lattices and the way magnetic field lines space themselves in certain models. Critics counter that humans like these numbers and see them everywhere. That might be so, but the tape measure still lands on the same fractions in the strangest places, and the echo in those rooms behaves like the math says it should. A thin electrode touches quartz grain in a limestone mix, and the oscilloscope trace lifts. Nothing dramatic, but not nothing. A speaker in the next bay throbs a low tone through a block set on rubber feet, and the instrument registers a whisper of current. Piezoelectricity, the textbook calls it. Squeeze a crystal, get a spark. Push a tone, get a field. Now slide that idea into a walk through Giza's granite or Malta's quartz-rich walls, and it becomes harder to call sound a side effect. It might have been part of the work, a function, not a flourish. The room holds its breath over images from China's Longyu caverns. Chisel marks run in parallel waves, as if a tool danced in a consistent rhythm across acres of walls. Layer depth holds steady, angles meet cleanly, and the finish is uniform enough to pass a carpenter's eye test. Engineers in the lab say the patterns look like a human hand trained by a metronome. Others whisper about resonance-assisted carving, the idea that stone, eased by specific frequencies, moves under hand tools in a way we haven't replicated on the surface. It remains controversial. It is also visually persuasive. On a separate monitor, a model of the Great Pyramid opens in layers until a lattice of cavities and shafts sits exposed like an instrument. Acoustic plots overlay that lattice, and the lines suggest that certain rooms could couple and feed energy between them through the body of the stone. Christopher Dunn's name appears on a slide, and his idea enters the lab air. A pyramid as a tuned device where cavities and channels built a standing wave you could harvest. The lab does not vote on theory. It measures, models, and notes that the subterranean spaces respond to sound in ways that warrant more than a shrug. Back at the bench, someone sets a steel straight edge against a polished interior from Egypt's giant stone boxes. The gap light is thin to the point of fussy argument. Sub-millimeter tolerances get written in the margin and circled again. Mainstream answers point to time and willpower. Give a skilled craftsperson a lifetime and a standard, and you can drive error down. That may be true in one site. The question bites when the same finish shows up in a different quarry, under a different culture, with a matching angle and a mirrored polish, as if workshop notes travelled without a scribe. A slender tube filled with smoke rolls across a scale model of a Cappadocian gallery. The plume pulls toward a side slit, then slows in a pocket, then slips up an unseen shaft. The math on the whiteboard backs what the smoke shows. The air path isn't lucky, it is engineered. Derinkuyu's design lifts into mind, though we keep away from repetition and pass the idea instead. If a city below rock breathes by design, the same planners could have cared about pitch and field as they did about air, embedding knowledge of flow that wasn't just water and wind. In the far corner, a set of copper and stone replicates is mounted to a vibration table. Low notes run up a scale while sensors read. At certain frequencies, the contact resistance falls a hair, like the point where a jar loosens after a careful twist. That slight change is not magic, it's material response. The lab notebook holds the observation for what it is and no more. Still, the mind wanders to a line of workers, a chant or a drum keeping tempo, hands moving just so when the stone skin says yes. Charts of old tunnels in Europe hang beside modern geophysical plots. Where the tunnels kink and narrow, node points show up in the math. The layout repeats within ranges, not exactly but close enough for a pattern that travels. Some whisper that this hints at coordinated knowledge transfer, a shared blueprint scattered wide. Critics counter with human convergence, the way many minds blueprint similar answers when the problem is the same. Both thoughts can live in one room. The stone keeps its own counsel, and the air in those models keeps moving in ways that feel taught, not guessed. In another trial, a diamond blade cuts a granite face and leaves a known striation pattern. The ancient sample, held under a microscope, shows a different story. Less tear out, fewer start and stop bites, a smoother microtexture than we expect from abrasion alone. The lab does not claim impossible machines. It notes that the expected noise in the surface is missing. Either the finish step was unusually skilled, or a method we haven't matched shaped that last whisper of stone. The equipment drifts to a low idle, fans ticking down. Someone taps a magnetometer trace where an ancient shaft aligns with magnetic north. The deviation sits inside an error band we use for satellites, not shovels. A gloved hand presses the paper flat, and a pen draws a thin line through 3 sites on 2 continents, not as proof, but as a reminder that placement can carry intent. If invisible fields guided layout, then the underground architecture is not only about shelter, it is about coupling with the planet's own quiet forces. Skepticism has its chair in the circle. Archaeology leans on patience, on apprenticeship, on the strange power of tradition to refine a craft beyond our lazy expectations. That deserves respect. The lab nods to it. Then the projector rolls again through Malta's hum, Andean chambers with mirror walls, and European passages too narrow to be homes yet built with care that refuses a simple answer. The mind wants to put them in one basket. The evidence prefers a careful shelf with labels that might change. Back to Longyou for a moment, the team reviews the uniformity. Layer after layer, the chisel bites keep depth like a machine path. If you tried to brute force this finish, you'd expect fatigue to write itself into the strokes. It doesn't. The rows march on unbroken. If rhythm guided the hand, then sound was not a garnish. It was a ruler. That thought threads quietly through scenes from other sites, where the voice in a certain room does more than echo. It seems to do work. Numbers return us to the hypogeum and those narrow European veins, where recurring ratios pop up in places that weren't built as showpieces. If a golden proportion in a palace might be art, that same proportion in a crawl space looks like instruction. The lab spreadsheet lists them: widths to heights, distances between turns, slopes of ceilings to floor spans. A pattern holds where you least need beauty. That alone nudges the dial toward function wrapped in form, not form alone. One more scan rides the screen, an infrared sweep of a small carved shaft under heavy stone. The thermal signature breathes subtle heat along a line that bends gently before rising. If this were natural, the curve would be rough. It isn't. It looks like a guided path for air, sound, or charge. You trace it with your eyes and think of arteries, though the metaphor feels too alive for rock. Still, the thought won't leave, especially when the same bend turns up oceans away. A hand flips the lights, and for a second the room holds only the residual glow of instrument LEDs. The day's notes stack on the corner, elastic looped twice. The cautious truth is this: where we expect rough, we find smooth. Where we expect guesswork, we meet rules. Where we expect lonely inventions, we see echoes. If Earth's crust can be coaxed to carry vibration and stray current, then the old passages were not simply halls to hide inside. They may have been tuned pieces in a larger device that used the planet itself as its frame. You listen to The Last Fan Coast and think about what a network like that would sound like if it woke, not loud. A low tone, spread out and steady, threading through stone. Some might call that romance, others would call it physics. Either way, the idea waits in the lab air as the door clicks shut, ready to reappear the next time someone brings a chisel to old walls and hears, faintly, that the rock is already singing. The sound arrives first, a low, even tone recorded in a cave in 1997, so steady it feels less like a note and more like breath. Geologists logged it as microseismic resonance, the ground flexing in slow waves, a whisper of weight shifting deep below. Storytellers gave it another name, the Earth's heartbeat. In the recording, the air carries a faint metallic taste, and boots crunch lightly on damp grit, while the hum folds itself into the walls. You could count seconds between tiny pulses, yet time seems to stretch. The tone doesn't push, it holds. From that quiet rhythm, a larger pattern comes into view. There is a standing wave that circles the planet, trapped between the ground and the ceiling of the sky. It settles near 7.83 Hz, a slow flicker that sits inside the band our brains use when we drift into alpha, relaxed, aware, the edge of a waking dream. No mysticism is needed for the match to raise an eyebrow, it's simply close. Some whisper that ancient builders sensed this background beat the way sailors feel tied in their knees. Others dismiss the idea as retrofitting wonder into ordinary physics. Still, the numbers overlap, and the overlap lingers. Now add bodies in a room, a drum, a voice leaning into a chant that repeats at a steady pace. Modern labs have watched brainwaves slide toward the driver when a rhythm holds firm. Entrainment is the technical term, not magic, mechanism. A tapping hand can pull a scattered mind into a common tempo. Supporters suggest that long halls, stone chambers and drum circles were not just ritual theatre. They were tools to settle people into the same pace, slow breaths syncing with drums, thoughts loosening as sound wrapped the edges. Beneath those floors and hills, currents already moved. Telluric currents wind through the crust, flowing along minerals that carry charge, shaped by the planet's magnetic field and jolted by solar weather. They prefer paths of iron-rich rock, salty groundwater and fault lines. Maps of these flows do not look like rivers on the surface, they look like roots. In a few places, known tunnels sit almost on top of those conductive lines. That might be coincidence. It might also be a clue that builders learned the land by listening to where the ground took a charge, then threaded chambers through those tracks. Across cultures, different languages marked the same hint. In China, feng shui masters spoke of dragon veins, slopes and ridges where life force runs. In India, temple planners described nadis, pathways that carry energy through the body and by metaphor through land. In Old Britain, dowsers walked what later writers called ley lines, straight paths linking mounds, circles and standing stones. None of these were electrical diagrams, yet each tradition reached for an anatomy of the earth. The idea that the ground has a pulse isn't modern, it just picked up new instruments. Our own time still chooses the underworld for careful work. Particle accelerators favour bedrock, not just for stability but for electromagnetic shielding. Data vaults go underground for the same reason. Thick earth blocks trace signals and cosmic noise, creating a natural quiet zone where measurements hold. The practical instinct mirrors a possibility. Perhaps those who carved earlier tunnels also sought steadiness. Not for fragile sensors, but for fragile minds or fragile history. Anything that needed shelter from storms we couldn't see. In Malta, a carved complex offers a laboratory we didn't expect. The hypogeum carries a strong resonance near 110 Hz, a note that amplifies a certain male voice in one room and sets adjacent walls trembling in sympathy. When that note rides through stone, instruments pick up more than sound. Limestone and granite have piezoelectric quirks. Push on them or vibrate them, and charge can rise on their surfaces. At small scales, it's modest. At human scale, it's enough to measure. Some whisper the ancients discovered this by ear and skin, not with theory but by feedback. Speak here, feel that shiver there, and adjust the curve until a room hums with intent. Put shielding and resonance together and another idea forms. An underground chamber naturally acts a bit like a Faraday cage, a place where outside fields struggle to intrude. During a solar storm, when the sky crackles and instruments spike, A cavity in deep rock can sit calmer. A catastrophe shield theory grows from that fact. It says these spaces doubled as sanctuaries against radiation and electromagnetic surges, protecting bodies, seeds, plans. Critics counter that the needs of daily survival, food, water, heat, weigh heavier than subtle fields. Both can be true. People build shelters for more than one reason. From shelters to systems is a longer step, but the step tempts. If hallways touch conductive seams and resonant rooms sat like nodes, then a network takes shape. A caretaker hypothesis suggests the carvers saw themselves not just as survivors, but as tuners. Their passages may have been arranged to vent stress, move air, dampen quake tremors, and carry sound in ways that soothed frightened crowds. They kept the planet's rhythms smooth where they could. Not control, guidance, like placing stones in a river to soften a rapid. A field notebook from a modern caver adds a human note to the model. She presses her palm to a limestone pillar while a partner tests tones in steady steps. At one pitch, the stone seems to warm against her skin. At another, her chest vibrates. She laughs once, startled, then writes down the frequency. No ceremony, just perception. The space answers when prompted, and they adjust the prompt. In small ways, this repeats what ancient planners may have done with their own voices and hands, learning a room by how it responded. Resonance touches more than ears. In those experiments, people report flickers at the edge of vision and a sense that time slightly folds. Calm rises or anxiety, depending on where the note lands in the body. A builder who learned to keep groups settled through hours of storms or sieges would have prized that effect. The chambers could be medicine. Few tools are cheaper than carved air and a skillfully placed voice. Telluric maps layered under tunnel maps show odd alignments. A corridor hews close to a fault where groundwater climbs. A chamber sits over a seam rich in iron. Not always. Enough to notice. The Earth's own wires run in unpredictable ways, yet old paths sometimes rest where those wires converge. A dowser's rod might bend there. A magnetometer might twitch. In that twitch lies a hint of intentional placement, a choice to work with geology rather than against it. The shielding idea takes on a second layer in modern crises. Underground facilities weather electromagnetic pulses better than surface sites. They keep hard drives intact and instruments honest during spikes. If ancient vaults held seeds, tablets, or even just shared memory in fragile minds, that insurance would matter. The walls would keep storms outside and hold a steady background for breathing and thought. After the blast, people climb the steps and carry forward what they remember. None of this requires a single empire or a master blueprint. It asks only for careful listeners spread across centuries, each group learning a fragment and passing it down, wrapped in song, myth, or layout. The terms change, the tools change, the instinct stays. Work with the ground's pace. Set your rooms on the quiet side of a hill. Carve for tone. Teach the next hands how to find the beat again when records fade. Back in that 1997 recording, the hum holds for a while, then drops out. Not in a dramatic way. More like a breath taken, then a pause. The absence lets your ear notice smaller sounds. A drip, a shift of gravel, a faint creak of pack straps settling. When the tone returns, you feel it before you hear it. It sits lower, as if the cave joined in a fraction more deeply. It may be that the planet's rhythms shaped us as much as we shaped rooms to meet them. The match between that global standing wave and our calmest brain state could be an accident. Or it could be one reason caves, tunnels, and stone cells steadied people long before medicine learned new names for anxiety. People kept going back underground to listen and to wait. If builders learned to tune chambers to encourage restoration, they might have done it under pressure. Long nights with ash in the air, strangers sheltering together, elders telling children to keep their voices low. A room that makes the crowd breathe together is a kind of power. Used well, it carries you across the worst hours. Used poorly, it can stir panic. Placement and tone decide which way it leans. There's a thought that won't quite let go. Perhaps the most advanced part wasn't a tool at all. It was the decision to treat the Earth as an instrument that needed care. The tunnels become strings laid along fault lines, the chambers as tuning pegs, the voices as bows. That metaphor bends under strain and still points somewhere useful. Maintenance, not dominion. The recording ends with a faint scuff and a click. The cave goes quiet on tape, though it keeps moving in stone. Somewhere, a low wave still circles the globe at 7.83 cycles per second. Perhaps the old carvers knew how to meet it and match it, and the trace of that conversation still waits in the rock. If you listen in the right place, the buried chorus might feel close enough to answer. The screen smears into blocks of grey where it used to sharpen. A cursor hovers over coordinates near Giza, and the image refuses to resolve. Layers of pixelated fog replacing crisp stone and wind-scoured sand. It looks less like a technical error and more like a soft erasure happening in real time, the way ink bleeds through paper until the words fade. You zoom out, zoom in, try another date on the timeline. Each pass ends the same way. Edges blur, pits become brushstrokes, and the shapes that once suggested open voids dissolve into anonymous static. Digital archaeology turned to mush, pixel by pixel. At a desk lit by a lone lamp, a researcher rubs tired eyes and clicks through cached tiles. Yesterday's screenshot shows an oval depression with a neat rim. Today's refresh smudges it into nothing. The air is stale, tea gone cold, a notepad crowded with latitudes and tiny arrows. An email pings. The field permit that took months to assemble is cancelled without detail, a sentence that reads like a shrug. Another tab opens to a repository the team used for years. The login works, the folder names appear, then a redirect lands on a page that says simply, "Access denied." No drama, no argument, just a door that will not open. There is a pattern to the refusals, if you're patient enough to line them up. In 2017, a high-profile scanning effort announced a massive void above the Grand Gallery, the kind that makes headlines, the kind that stirs old arguments. Since then, access to that zone has been folded into the blanket of ongoing analysis. This is standard language. It can mean care. It can also mean a file moved to a cabinet no one new can find. Either way, the hallway between discovery and follow-up feels longer than it should. Far from Cairo, a different door closes. The expedition notes from a 1970s cave survey in Ecuador that described sealed lower levels can't be located in the archive that once housed them. The record points to a lending event, then the thread breaks. In Turkey, trenches around a promising cavity fill back in after a brief burst of activity, halted under the label of stability concerns. These words are reasonable. Hills do slump, ceilings do fall. But when you stack them beside one another across years and borders, they begin to sound like the same sentence spoken with different accents. The echo goes back further than memory would like. Military files from the late 1940s discuss polar flights and cold weather manoeuvres. Their public pages feel tidy. Their missing pages are where eyes linger. In Egypt, fresh concrete appears over a shaft mouth in the 1990s after a short season of interest, and the paperwork shuffles rooms. In recent years, lists of protected heritage sites add lines that designate underground sectors as restricted, a category that can be both prudent and blunt. Preservation is not the enemy here, but protection can become a curtain when the light is already dim. When sound becomes the clue, the conversation gets even quieter. An acoustics team working under Malta's stone returns from a long day with odd measurements on a handheld meter, low frequencies that feel like a pressure change rather than a note. Asked about it later over coffee, one researcher describes impossible values and then stops. A smile, then a gentle diversion toward logistics. Not secrecy exactly. More like a shared understanding that some things are easier to publish than others, and easier still to leave unsaid. The world has not stopped building below ground. We still entrust the earth with what we fear to lose. Armies thread command centres beneath hills. Data sleeps in rooms with no windows. Networks cooled by air that never felt the sun. Seeds rest in vaults in the permafrost. A vast warren beneath Beijing keeps to itself, designed as a buffer against the worst moments a world can offer. Men and women walk reinforced corridors, badge lanyards bouncing on chests, fluorescent lights humming as steady as a heartbeat. Old habits persist because they work. One afternoon, a journalist stands at a wire fence in the desert, miles from any crowd. The GPS says this is the spot where a lidar sweep once drew clean lines through the subsurface like a page ruled for writing. Beyond the fence, the ground looks ordinary. Chalk dust, scrub, an old track. She sets a small recorder on the dirt and waits. Wind lifts sand. The mic picks up a faint tremor, a kind of low throb that could be a truck far off, or something more local. She tries a different angle for the lens. A white SUV pauses on a distant ridge, then rolls away. The wind takes her footprints in one go, as if the afternoon has gently decided it's time to start over. Some whisper that the wet grey blur on satellite platforms is policy by another name. Others dismiss it as software stitching, privacy filters, or the limits of public resolution. Two things can be true. Platforms do apply masks around sensitive installations. Algorithms do mush together age-mismatched frames and smear detail into soup. The effect is what counts to the eye at the end, less clarity where curiosity is highest. You're left to interpret a fog. Because the mind looks for motive, the story bends easily toward conspiracy. The quieter thought is stewardship. Maybe some chambers are better left to rest. Maybe certain technologies or alignments, if they exist, are clumsy in the hands of an age that can't agree what to do with less volatile tools. The word fragile applies as much to stone as to social calm. A site can be loved to death. A rumour can do harm. Acting with care looks similar to covering tracks when viewed through a long lens. Meanwhile, the underground keeps serving the same jobs. It hides what we need hidden. It shields what we need safe. Engineers site servers in rock because shielding is better there. Planners bury long lines because storms are patient and fate is not. The pattern feels unromantic until you hold it next to old myths. Then the rhyme sneaks through. Caverns that once took chance now absorb cooling fans. The function rhyme is crisper than the form. The archive chase continues in fits and starts. A new graduate student finds a reference to the missing Ecuadorian folder in a hardbound index and scribbles the page number on her hand. The listed shelf shows a gap where the binding should be. The one next to it contains misfiled ship logs from a distant country. Nothing sinister, just years of hands placing the wrong thing in the wrong place in rooms without enough light. Human error is a powerful co-author, and yet, when particular categories of error repeat in the same subfields, the brain tracks the curve as if guided by a hidden rail. At a conference, someone on a panel mentions a subglacial corridor detected by remote sensing. They choose their words like stepping stones across a stream. No one says portal, no one says vault. Everyone nods as if the subject is both familiar and off limits, like a family story that can be gestured toward but not told in full. The reason supplied is protecting research integrity. The reason felt in the room is harder to measure. You can taste it in the air like dust. It helps to notice how often the denial arrives with courtesy. No slammed doors, only polite non-responses that leave little to push against. A permit process routed to a new department. A letter that invites reapplication next fiscal cycle. A file temporarily closed for review. The stubborn thing about quiet obstacles is that they do not make good scenes. They do not scandalise. They simply slow time until the subject cools. Elsewhere, high-end shelters go deeper and cleaner with each year. They are designed with their own air, their own water, their own seasons behind doors that close softly. They sell not only protection, but continuity. The promise that life can be carried underground as if in a case, then unpacked later when the weather improves. It's hard not to hear the old refrain inside this modern plan: preserve the essentials Lower the lights. Wait. Back on the screen, the blur wobbles as if your internet static could mimic a secret. You try coordinates in the far south. The map skates over white until a region of oval depressions comes into view. The forms are clean. The detail is not. A ring of compression artifacts sits where sharpness should be. You check the update log and see a reference to provider restrictions. If there is a reason, it stays in the fine print. The quieter question grows in that space where facts run out. Suppose the fading images and sealed shafts are not only barriers but signs of care. Supporters suggest that some cultures viewed key sites as sleeping tools rather than ruins. Critics counter that such talk romanticizes patchy records and gives cover to mismanagement. The pull between these views may be the real subject. It says as much about our age as it does about theirs. A conservation officer in a sun hat flips through a clipboard and waves a small group of students back from a trench lip. The day is hot. The edge crumbles in dry chips. She kneels and presses her palm to the soil to check for vibration from a road you can't see. Then she marks an X and writes a single word in her notes. Pause. It's such a human act. Precise, temporary, hopeful. The ground will still be there tomorrow. Not every story should be forced simply because we want it. The thread connects farther than we like to admit. Old reports stamped in black ink. New forms filed into online corners with nested logins and vague error codes. Travel stopped by health crises, then by budgets, then by weather. When the object of interest is underground, anything that slows momentum can begin to feel intentional. Sometimes it is. Often it's a tangle of mundane limits that still add up to the same effect. Less light in the places that would benefit from it. There is a different way to hold the gap. Think of secrecy as a pressure difference, not a wall. The weight of public attention on a tender site can crush it faster than neglect. The weight of unchecked speculation can also distort it beyond recognition. In between sits a narrow band of care where access is paced, where disclosures wait for context to catch up. The band is too narrow for comfort. It may be the only band where the story keeps its shape. By late evening, the researcher at the lamp changes tactics. Instead of chasing the missing tiles, they open a new document and type what is still known with certainty. Coordinates, dates, the last open scan that showed a cavity, the names of teams, the statements that are on record. Then a second list forms beneath the first. Things that could be true, that fit the edges without forcing them, possibly harmless, possibly vital. Both lists will live side by side for now. The cursor blinks, the map hums softly on the second monitor, and the urge to break a lock fades into the quieter work of waiting. Not passive waiting, disciplined waiting, the kind that watches for small shifts at the edges of a blurred frame. And somewhere else, perhaps, a door that was sealed for reasons unknown holds its hinge and simply stays closed through another season. What looks like absence might be a different medium for memory. Not a denial, but a slow reveal paced on a timescale that does not care for our calendar. If that is true, the next sound won't be a shout. It will be that felt, low note returning from stone, guiding us into the last stretch where questions turn inward and the ground asks for a softer voice. Dawn moves slowly across the map. A pale line touches dunes where last night's wind drew new ribs in the sand, drifts over cedar groves still wet with dew, and slides along mountain flanks where cold hangs in the shadow like a held breath. The light comes on in steps, and with it a kind of remembering. Below the quiet fields and sleeping cities, carved spaces keep their shape. The tunnels rest, but the earth has not forgotten them. Let the frame widen until the planet feels like a living body. The crust acts like skin, scarred in places, soft in others, always healing around what we've cut. The passages beneath read like veins, gathering and branching, thick where old cultures needed them, and thin where rock refused. You and I move across that surface like a pulse. With each step there's pressure, heat, and a faint tremor that sinks into stone and lingers. It's a small thing to say engineering. It's a larger thing to say memory. Here's the turn that sits quietly in the background. Some whisper we didn't shape these places to outlast the planet, but so the planet could outlast us. Tunnels as the Earth's breathers, cavities that flatten shock, hold charge and bank knowledge the way a root holds water through a dry season. Supporters suggest the old builders saw themselves as caretakers, not escapees, tending a network that steadied the ground more than it protected a crown. It's a different lens and it changes the light. That instinct to go downward returns across ages, and it's rarely loud. You can hear it in the slip of a page inside a cave library where monks hid their scriptures during wars, ink drying in cool air while footsteps faded above. You can see it in the coal-stained hands of miners who learn to read rock the way a sailor reads weather, following seams because stone speaks patterns if you listen long enough. You can feel it in the quiet rooms under cities where engineers stack servers and batteries and build walls that mute storms into a steady hum. The motion repeats, and the reasons change costumes, but the path stays the same. The modern underworld has its own glow. Walk past a bakery before sunrise and you'll hear the soft thud of dough, and, beneath it, the ventilation of the subway, a distant rush that sounds like surf under concrete. Stand over a data center and the ground thrums like a living drum, blue-white light bathing rows of silent machines that remember for us when our own heads are too full. In another district, a cold bunker carries the smell of oil and metal, doors thick enough to make sound feel heavy. None of this calls itself ancient, yet all of it completes a line begun long before maps had names. Myth doesn't sit outside this. It stands in the doorway with a lamp pointing down the stairs. The Hopi tell of helpers beneath the ground, not as a fairy tale but as a route of return. Tibetan teachings describe hidden realms linked by passages, less like escape hatches and more like classrooms. Egypt kept a word for the below place where the sun travels at night, a journey mapped by stars and measured in gates. These aren't warnings to stay away. They read like directions: descend, learn, and come back up changed. What if the terrain we label underworld is also our interior? Your mind holds corridors you enter only when the surface gets too loud. Old voices live there. Long-term memory lives there. The place where grief can sit without breaking the day lives there. We go down when loss cracks the ground. We go down when new knowledge runs ahead of courage, and we come back up carrying something we didn't have before. The ancients may have carved these spaces not only to store grain and scrolls, but to store states of mind. Listen for a moment to the planet's own slow rhythm, the background hum that storms right in the sky, and stone answers like a tuning fork. Some call it a resonance, the kind that keeps lightning and oceans in a loose tempo with each other. Heartbeats drift toward it when the world gets still. Breath falls into its long measure. In underground rooms, the note holds longer. You can feel it in the chest more than hear it with the ear. It isn't proof of anything mystical. It's a reminder that rhythm is older than language and sometimes more useful. So the answer might not be a diagram or a final word. It may be a return to an old habit we forgot how to name. When people hid poems in caves, when servers went below ground, when seeds took their place inside mountains, the rhyme stayed steady. Protect the delicate things from heat and haste, and let them ride out the noisy seasons. The earth already knows this. Roots do it. Springs do it. We learned by watching, and then we kept watching until our watching turned into architecture. Across the hills, a farm road warms under sunlight, and a tractor starts. The field looks ordinary, yet a metre down the soil tightens, and under that the first stones of an older wall throw heat at a different rate, and under that the real air begins, dry and cool in a chamber with no windows. It doesn't host ceremonies now, it keeps the shape of them, which might be enough. Not everything has to act in the present to matter to it, shift to a city. The woman in the corner store props the door with a stack of papers and counts the till. Under her tiles runs a service tunnel lined with pale dust. A century ago, men in wool caps dragged cables there and left their thumbprints in cement. Tonight, a kid in a reflective vest will check a valve and take a photo for a report no one will read twice. The tunnel does not care what day it is. It does what it was cut to do. Small tasks carry big patterns when you stack them for long enough. Back on open ground, a river curls past a road cut, and someone has wedged a hand into a crack to feel coolness after a hike. The skin meets stone. It's simple contact. But in that touch, there's a bridge across time that no torque can replace. Fingers learn the grain. Palm reads temperature. A vein under the wrist picks up speed for a second. The body adjusts to the environment the way a word adjusts to a sentence. We are still made for this. The old stories give us more than plot. They offer posture, knees bending to climb down, eyes adjusting, breath slowing, hand to wall. That's a practice, not a superstition. Every culture that kept a tale of descent also kept a way to return. It matters that both halves survive. Descent without return turns into loss. Return without descent turns into noise. The twin act is where wisdom lives. If you trace the thread from temple caves to train tunnels, you get a ledger of our fears and our care. The list is varied. Flood, war, famine, fire, data loss, power failure. The answer repeats: build below, keep safe, wait. Critics counter that this is just pragmatic thinking dressed up as myth. Maybe it is. But the way it repeats across languages, climates and centuries suggests something deeper than mere convenience. There's another path through all this. It says the Earth might use us to do what it cannot do by itself quickly. Adapt. Cavities we create become reservoirs for pressure or heat, and the very act of digging teaches us to read small signals before they become big events. This view doesn't grant us heroism, it assigns us chores. Caretaker is a quiet job. It shows up in maintenance logs and steady hands on old tools. You can test the idea in your own day. Find a basement stair and stand at the top for a minute. Smell the concrete and dust. Feel the temperature change on your arms as you go down 2 steps and then back up to the light. Notice what your heart does. Notice what your mind brings forward. That's an echo of a long pattern, scaled to a human body. The big tunnels just write it in bedrock. Not every chamber we've inherited will open for us. Some doors are sealed by collapse, others by choice. The right response to a closed door isn't always a battering ram. Sometimes it's patience. Sometimes it's listening for air moving through a stone seam so faint you have to press your ear against it and hold your breath. If sound answers, the path is alive. If it doesn't, mark the place and keep the map warm. The camera returns to sand, where a slope hides a darker patch that doesn't reflect morning the way the rest does. A faint glow threads across the grains, the kind that could be mineral or a shard of glass catching light from an angle. It looks like nothing to someone walking fast. It looks like a beckoning to someone who has time. You already know which one of those you are. These spaces may not wait for discovery. They sit under our routines like a bass note under a song, patient and steady. The task is simpler and stranger. Remember why we carved them in the first place. The reasons are not gone. They're just quiet. And if you listen, the ground still answers with that slow, low note that guided our grandparents, and theirs, whenever they chose to go below and come back up carrying something worth keeping. The pattern refuses to settle into one neat origin story. It sketches something quieter and more human. When the surface grows uncertain, we draw lines in the dark and make them livable. Corridors become calendars. Chambers become schools. Air shafts double as clocks for people who measure time by the feel of wind on stone. You can deny an empire, it's harder to deny a habit. Across ages, the blueprint repeats. Continuity moves below ground, where weather, war and rulers change slower. You see it today in pragmatic forms. Server halls buried for temperature control, seed vaults in bedrock, train tunnels humming like arteries under cities that pretend to sleep. None of this proves a single hidden civilization. It suggests a shared response to risk, taught by geology and passed down as craft. Some whisper those older routes are still threaded through the crust, their geometry tuned to fields we barely track. Others dismiss that as romance clinging to ruins. The truth, perhaps, lives in the way people keep chiseling towards safety, without a memo telling them why. Keep your mind open, your skepticism close, and let me know where you're listening from tonight, and which doorway in this story you'd walk through if given the key. Would you choose the cold breath of a shaft at dawn, or the warm echo of a chamber tuned to a human voice? Your answer says something about the kind of map you trust. Somewhere a scanner hums, a thin line holds on a screen while frost crawls across a window and the antenna ticks in the wind. The room is dim, the coffee stale, and someone's hand steadies the dial for another pass. If a door opens, it will open in its own time. Until then, the earth keeps its quiet, and we keep tracing the contours of a memory that still fits our hands.